The girl was standing and warming herself near the fire when she was asked if she was really leaving. Turning around, she saw her father. In all the tribes, she was the only adult princess. It was her duty. After all, this was their chance to become allies with the empire, said Wind Tribe Princess Bashar. Besides, what else could she do if she was not the chosen heir, but simply Tyuka Yeli Bashar? So, said the girl's father, she will marry a man from the empire. She was so worried about not becoming an heir that she decided to leave the house, he asked. Tyuka said that she would rather prove her worth to the empire than spend the rest of her life serving inferior men. Tyuka, the man shouted in anger. But you know that she is better than her 3 brothers, the princess exclaimed in response. Being better doesn't mean being the leader. She needs people's support. How could she not know that? Clenching her fists, she agreed. It was her fault. She should have been born a man. Then she would have been able to get everyone's approval. The only daughter's caustic words greatly upset and hurt the head of the tribe. Tyuka, the man exclaimed after his daughter, but she, without listening to him, went out and left the tent. But outside, she was immediately asked how she dared to speak so disrespectfully to her father. A woman should not raise her voice, said the first prince of the tribe, the future heir of Nihir. If she is the same rude woman in the empire, her husband will immediately leave her. It doesn't concern him, said Tyuka. It does concern him, he replied, because she is his only sister. Besides, her marriage is needed for an alliance with the empire. Seeing his sister being sold to the empire will not let him sleep. It's true that her marriage will make Bashar stronger, so he better work hard instead of taking out his anger on her. What a pitiful fellow, she said to her brother, and he immediately became enraged at the insult. What? He exclaimed irritably, and swinging his arm shouted at the girl, "Know your place!" But she intercepted his hand and asked Nihir not to make her regret that she had given up her place as heir to him. He's already got a title he doesn't deserve, so he has to try hard. When she let go of his hand and walked away, he cried out in anger and annoyance. She gave in, he shouted irritably. Don't make my sandals laugh. He was elected the next head. She lost. Tyuka Yeli Bashar, you are a non-entity and always will be, the elder shouted. You will never be happy if you marry the empire's watchdog. Sighing, the princess called Layla to get ready to go. Yes, your highness, she replied. The empire's watchdog, she hoped the man she would spend the rest of her life with would be worthy. So, in the empire, standing at the enclosing gate, a man looking into the distance said that the bride was late. 20 years ago, the Krone Empire had conquered half the continent, but Halton thrived despite its location on the border. And the reason for this was one man, the strongest knight, who was highly valued by the emperor himself, and the ignorant aristocrats only envied him. The inhabitants of his estate looked down on him, the owner of Halton, the Duke of Esbaden, Leonard van Esbaden. A knight approached the Duke standing on the wall and informed his lordship that the bride from Bashar would soon arrive. But for some reason, hearing these words, I involuntarily remembered the beginning. The emperor thought it was the first time he had seen him since the succession ceremony. The Duke apologized. He could not leave the border. His Majesty replied that thanks to his hard work, there is now peace on the border. He doesn't need to apologize, and he must be wondering why he invited him to the palace. And so he ordered Duke Esbaden to marry for the sake of the empire. Naturally, the man could not even imagine receiving such favor from His Majesty. Bashar, an empire formed as a result of the union of 5 Norman tribes. The Bashars believe that the land should not belong to humans, and the Krone Empire considers the Bashars barbarians. And then, after many years of hostility, the 2 states decided to enter into a marriage alliance for the sake of peace and harmony. He ordered the knight to open the gates, and the order was immediately carried out. And then the knights, led by the Duke, went outside to meet the Bashars who had arrived on horseback. The knights immediately noticed that they were all on horseback and without carriages, so it became difficult to tell which of them was the crown princess. They would know as soon as they saw her face. They said she was so disgusting that men ran from her. She is the only unmarried princess of Bashar, so it is understandable that she is ugly. But then they were puzzled and tense by the question of why they weren't slowing down. The knights standing in front of the gates were worried about their own safety and began shouting for them to stop. But the horses did not slow down. Raising dust, the knights protected his lordship, shouting about the horses. The man himself tensed up as he followed the column, when suddenly a rider rushed forward and reared his horse, stopping the movement. Her breath caught in her chest, and then a question rang out, is he the man who will become her husband? Taking off her hood, the girl said that she was glad to meet her. Her silver hair glistened in the sun as she introduced herself as Tyuki Yeli Bashar. With the girl who would soon become his wife, Tyuka asked the man if they could continue the ceremony right now. On her wedding day, Princess Bashar, who failed to become heir, was married to the alliance between the two warring states. And Duke Esbaden, the best swordsman of the Krone Empire, saw each other for the first time. Then the princess and the duke came to the ceremonial hall, where there was not even a priest, only a couple of guests. He couldn't believe that this was Mr. Esbaden's wedding. It was the only way out. The Bashars don't believe in their god, the other replied. Leonard's right-hand man, Claude, asked why his lordship needed to take a savage as a wife. Leonard's second right-hand man, Baron, told Claude to keep his mouth shut, reminding him that this wedding was an order from His Majesty. "Ah, of course," he exclaimed. "Since it is so necessary to conclude an alliance through marriage, let His Highness marry." He flatly refused this. This marriage only proves that his lordship is as important as His Highness the Prince. Claude snorted at this nonsense, and Baron said that now that he and Bashar had formed an alliance, his lordship's opponents would bite their tongues. But still, this decision was stressful. All this time they were fighting with the savages from Bashar. But it was not easy because of their outstanding skills as horsemen, archers, and faith in the power of nature. "They are just barbarians raiding the empire," Claude muttered. He did not understand how his lordship had agreed to this marriage, and meanwhile the ceremony was continuing. "From now on, they will faithfully and responsibly fulfill their duty as husband and wife," the man concluded. Now the witness asked the spouses to exchange rings. Tyuka and Leonard exchanged glances, and after that the man put a ring on her finger. The hall became noisy. They clapped and whispered at the same time. "So here you have the Duke's wedding, only a few guests, everything organized in a hurry." The Duke's close knights remained silent, congratulating their master, while the spouses only looked at each other. The Duke's wedding celebrations continued until late into the night in the bars of Halton. What a feast the new Duchess threw for them! They hadn't celebrated like this for a long time. He himself was quite surprised they said the Duchess was as ugly as war, but in reality she turned out to be a beauty. She and the Duke are a real sight for sore eyes. They're going to have a hot wedding night, but the Duke is off somewhere. Is it a custom in Krone to ignore the bride on her wedding night? Tyuka waited for him for several hours. He ran away right after the ceremony, not the best start. Tyuka thought about her impressions and conversation after arriving in the Empire. Then her personal servant Layla asked Her Highness, "He is very handsome." Tyuka asked who they were talking about. Layla answered, "About who would become her husband, of course, they say. He is a knight of blood and steel. A man who can kill any monster with one hand is also handsome, unlike those weaklings and cowards with a cute face. Their men are the strongest warriors, but not nearly as handsome. Tyuka didn't even know, because Layla constantly called her a beauty. Yes, because in all of Bashar she is considered the ideal of beauty. In Krone they will consider it the same, he already knows. She comes from Krone." The princess thanked Layla for such warm words, and said that she didn't care what he looked like. "True," the maid asked in surprise, "but what's important then?" But most of all, Tyuka wanted her husband to be easy to control. But how can you discipline him? How can you find an approach to him if they don't even see each other? It's their first wedding night. And why does it only take so long? Suddenly, out of boredom, the princess's attention was drawn to a painting that was out of place in the style of the room. How strange, thought the princess, and reached out to her. But then a stern voice came from the side, ordering her not to touch. She shuddered and looked around. And she saw in front of her Duke Leonard, who had just come out of the shower. The princess awkwardly apologized to him and said that she didn't know it was forbidden. She asked if he had finished work, saying that she was already planning to go to his office soon. "I forgot to warn her," the man said. Even though they were married, he had no intention of sharing her bed. "What?" Tyuka asked irritably. They both knew their marriage was political, and neither wanted it, so what was the point of fulfilling their marital duty, he asked. She could do whatever she wanted, he didn't mind. The main thing is that she does not tarnish her new title of Duchess of Esbaden. This statement from her husband was like a bolt from the blue, completely devastating Tyuka. Yes, how? Clenching her fists until they trembled with anger and pursing her lips, the princess thought. How can you be so disgusting? As if she was burning with desire to share a bed with him, he said his few words and ran away, the freak. You see, he is the most miserable and unfortunate person in this marriage. How dare he compare her to himself? She seemed like the heroine of a romance novel to him. Finally letting off some steam, the princess exhaled. So that's how it is. Well, good. Soon he will understand what kind of woman he married. In the morning, Layla asked Her Highness if she had managed to sleep, noticing that her hair was a little brittle. Everything is fine, Chuka answered, asking when they would bring her dress she couldn't show up for breakfast in a nightgown from Bashar. Layla asked not to worry. The maid would come with the dress soon, when there was a knock on the door, asking permission to enter. But then Layla's scream was heard. How else can this be understood? And they call these rags a dress. This is unacceptable. Her Highness will not wear this. Bring another dress immediately. The servant asked her to forgive her. Her ladyship had arrived earlier than expected, so there were no suitable outfits available. What? Layla was seething with anger. How dare she blame Her Highness for what happened? The once taken-aback princess noticed a mocking smile on the face of the servant of the Duke's house. Layla continued to swear, shouting, she must come to breakfast with the Duke, so— Everything is fine, the calm princess suddenly interrupted. Leave the dress here. She will dress herself. The maid who arrived obeyed her grace, but the princess's personal maid was worried. And when she left, she exclaimed anxiously to Her Highness, asking why she had let her go, even if she had scolded her first. But Princess Tayuka told Layla to forget about it. The servants did not accept her, because she spent her wedding night alone. They probably think she was sold to him. Of course, she's not going to wear such a dress, of course, Layla answered. Let that maid bring a new one. There's no point in making a mountain out of a molehill, the princess told her confidant. She already has an outfit. At this time, the Duke was already sitting at the table, and, while waiting, asked the butler what time it was for breakfast and where the Duchess was. Apparently, the man replied, changing clothes took longer. Suddenly, the doors to the hall opened and the princess apologized for the delay. When she walked inside, the servants gasped in horror and the Duke himself rose from his seat in shock. The girl came to breakfast in her nightgown. What Duke Leonard asked, stunned, while Tayuka sat down on the prepared seat, crossing her legs. Apparently, the princess answered coquettishly. He decided not to start breakfast, waiting for his wife. It seems she is right, and I must admit I will be delighted to try Krone's cuisine for the first time. What are you doing? Duke Esbaden finally asked her, having recovered from the shock. Tayuka innocently asked his lordship what he was talking about, and Leonard replied, about her outfit. She came wearing it because she had no other dresses, she explained. In what sense did that mean? The Duke asked. The maid was supposed to bring her clothes, she asked, smiling. He says this, drawing the Duke's attention to the things in Layla's hands. His lordship himself told her that she must bear her new title with dignity, of course. This kind of dress would stain her honor. But perhaps in the Esbaden family it is customary for the Duchess to wear rags. Sorry, I didn't know, she quipped. Hearing this, the Duke felt insulted, and the maids felt fear. Meanwhile, Tayuka remained calm and, on the contrary, was examining the Duke's reaction. What's wrong with him, the girl thought. He was offended by her words about the title. Come on, be sarcastic in response. But, contrary to all her expectations, the man took off his jacket and put it on his wife's shoulders. And then he ordered the maids to answer who brought this rag to the Duchess. The woman apologized to his lordship. She said she would bring her, but Leonard ordered her to be fired immediately. He did not tolerate those who did not know their place. Because of her words yesterday, he almost started to think she was empty-headed, but now he realized that it was her game. Honestly, it was flattering. But even though he accepted her, the princess said he shouldn't change his way of thinking. She had more important things to do than play games with her. The Duchess did not like to listen to orders about dismissal, so she would go and rest in her room. And so the girl, calling Layla with her, left the dining hall. Left alone, Layla exclaimed with joy, serves her right. She heard that the maid came from a noble family and had long been in love with the Duke. That's why she didn't want to accept her in the role of Duchess, but the silly girl didn't know who she was dealing with, and it served her right. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Her Highness asked for forgiveness, and the princess allowed entry. The woman asked permission to introduce herself. She was Sylvia, the head maid of the estate. Tayuka asked what brought her here, and she answered that His Highness ordered that new dresses be brought to her, and she would help her change. And she also offered a sincere apology for the incident. It was her fault, and she couldn't keep her in check. His lordship had already taken care of everything, so the head maid asked her to forget about it. Noticing the maid, the princess asked her to wait and ordered her to leave it here. The head maid reported that his lordship had asked to take this thing from her. The Duchess knew about it, and so she insisted that the servants leave the jacket here. But the Duke's servants could not understand why their new Duchess needed this. And so, without trying to put up with this, at nightfall the Duke went to his wife's room. What angered him was that she was simply forcing him to come to her. In the afternoon, the head maid reported that, as he had ordered, the dresses had been delivered to the Duchess. She also wanted to take his jacket, but this jacket was lent to her, so either the one who took it returns the item to the owner, or the owner picks it up personally. The door slammed loudly. He entered the stranger's room and said that she was apparently crazy about him. So that's what started this fuss. "And you, apparently, are crazy about this jacket," the princess quipped to the Duke. Once the Duke came running after him because of this commotion, he snatched his thing from her hands. He didn't like it when strangers used his things, that's all. Strangers. How cruel he was to his wife. Leonard chuckled at her words, and the princess continued. She forgot to tell him something this morning. "She didn't say she didn't want this marriage?" he asked in surprise. And the Duchess explained that she came here of her own free will. No one sold her, she is not a refugee. And if he wanted to get a quiet and submissive wife, he made the wrong choice. Exchanging sharp glances, Leonard asked his wife what she wanted. Through this marriage, he gained the trust of the emperor and the loyalty of the aristocracy, but she received nothing. And she had no intention of being a stranger in a country where she knew no one, so she too should benefit from their marriage. Didn't he think so? "Benefit?" asked the Duke, and her ladyship replied she wanted to have the full rights of a duchess. And also recognition from the Esbaden family. Now Leonard understood that she was not simple at all. She knew how the Bashars were treated in Krona, and what others think of her, but at the same time she is not at all embarrassed. "Okay, as you say," he agreed with a grin. He informed her that she would receive all the privileges of the title of Duchess of Esbaden, but first he grabbed her by the shoulder. And while changing his shoes in the air, Leonard pushed her onto the bed, hanging over her. And he said, since she started talking about rights, then you also need to fulfill your responsibilities. And he asked the Duchess if she agreed with this statement. Running his hand along her waist, he lightly squeezed her nightgown, and Tuka's heart began to beat faster. She looked into the man's eyes, and he assessed her face and body with his gaze. It couldn't be said that it wasn't attractive. The Duke squeezed her waist, lifting her up, but then Tiuka asked him to wait. "What is it?" Leonard asked. Wasn't she prepared for the actions a duchess is obliged to perform? The girl replied that she was ready, but she didn't want to sleep with a man she didn't love. But if he needs an heir so much, then she will help. "Forget it," Leonard ordered, letting go of the girl and stepping aside. He didn't want to sleep with a woman he didn't love either. That's why he stopped, the Duke said. "As you say," the princess answered, looking away. Chuka had a lot of experience fighting men on the battlefield, but not in bed for a second. She even began to worry that he would decide to take her by force. Then the man said that starting tomorrow she would have some things to do. "What's the matter?" Chuka asked in surprise, and the Duke explained that the Duchess had a considerable responsibility. "If you want rights, be prepared for responsibilities. It's reasonable to do what's necessary, but what exactly will these deeds be? These include estate budget planning and property management, control over servants and some boring social activities," he explained. "Well," the man continued, he hoped that she would cope with them without making mistakes. Leonardo would not like to know that his wife had tarnished the family's honor. The Duke quickly left the girl's room, but there was one picture in his head. The one when Tiuka said that she was ready, but she didn't want to sleep with a man she didn't love. Leonard stopped in the corridor, was silent for a long time, and suddenly asked himself why he was so irritated. And in my head there was that confident and proud look of the princess. The next day didn't go well for the girl. From the very morning she spent 5 hours straight looking through papers. How could he overwhelm her with work, despite the fact that this was her first day at work, and he was a loving husband? It was time for Her Highness to rest, but she answered Layla, "Everything is fine." Suddenly there was a knock on the door of the office. It was Sylvia, the head servant. The Duchess asked her to come in. Sylvia brought a list of necessary supplies for all areas of the estate, as well as bills. Chuka suggested that they sort out this work and take a rest, Layla exclaimed. She had said the same thing before. But then, having studied several papers, the Duchess turned to Sylvia. She asked the woman if Lion would accompany her. She wanted to inspect all the rooms indicated here. "She wants to go around them personally," the maid asked, but Tuka didn't trust other people's reports. The girl wanted to walk around the estate herself, and at the same time find out what was where. Sylvia agreed to prepare her rounds, and Layla exclaimed that she would make everyone some sandwiches to snack on along the way. They arrived at the kitchen, where all the food was stored, and where meals were prepared for his lordship and the residents of the estate. "This is the Duchess." The cooks discussed with concern what he was doing here. She comes from Bashar. The girls thought that everyone there was a wild barbarian, but she looks pretty good. Tuka asked why there was raw meat hanging there. It would spoil. Sylvia explained that this is usually how it happens. But this hook is magical. It was specially created for storing food. The moment meat is hung on it, it freezes. Layla was convinced that the meat was indeed icy. Sylvia added, "They find it strange because in Bashar they don't use magic." And in their estate lives one of the most powerful magicians of the empire, the owner of the White Tower, Mr. Zarian. "He is the one who creates such instruments," Layla exclaimed, "and in Bashar they use the power of nature. Magic requires a price, something the forces of nature do not, Her Highness of the Wind Tribe. They can control it and even predict the future that it whispers. Of course, the side effects of magic increase depending on the sorcerer's level, but here it was interrupted. A guy ran into the kitchen calling for Madam and stuttering with anxiety said, "It's urgent. What's wrong?" Sylvia asked. They were training a horse when suddenly it kicked one of their men and he stopped breathing. The man asked to call a doctor, screaming he was dying. "Where was the groom looking?" Madame asked anxiously, but then the Duchess confidently asked where the stables were. Irritably, Tuka ordered to take her to the wounded man. The guys sat next to their wounded friend, worried about his life but unable to do anything, asking him to wake up. These damn doctors don't go to penniless people like them, and Paul won't even give them money for medicine. "What are you doing?" Suddenly the Duchess's irritated cry was heard behind her. A person with a broken sternum cannot be laid on his back. She ordered him to be seated and leaned against a tree. "Who are you?" one of the workers asked in amazement, seeing this girl for the first time on the estate. Deciding to provide urgent assistance to the wounded man, the Duchess tore the hem of her dress. "Your Grace," cried Sylvia. "What are you staring at?" she asked the workers, shouting, "Well, turn away, yes, madam," they answered, stuttering. The head maid told her ladyship that this was terribly indecent, and in front of the servants, too. Without listening to her, the girl told Sylvia to call a doctor, who only provided first aid. "Doctor," Madame asked again, "but they only treat the estate's vassals right now," she firmly ordered. And with the same severity she explained that the man's life was in danger, and it was not the time to think about his origins. For a few seconds the woman froze, taken aback by the order, but still said that she would bring him now. The Duchess looked sternly at the workers who remained in place. They drew level with fear. And then she asked who was in charge here and why he was nowhere to be seen, and therefore she ordered him to be brought immediately. By that time, his lordship had returned from the campaign, and following the knight's warning words, he believed that everything was in order. "This horse has been stumbling lately and asked to be taken to the stable." The men awkwardly turned to his lordship and vaguely informed him that there was no time for that at the stables right now. Having extracted at least some details, Leonard asked what the Duchess did. After everything that had happened, Tuka sat in her room and recalled the past. Then she ordered the chief to be brought. But the working groom couldn't contain himself and shouted, "Paul doesn't deserve to be the head groom." Another pulled him back, trying to reason with him, but the guy told him to shut up, determined to tell him everything that had been simmering on his mind. The boy quickly asked her ladyship to listen. "Paul is always losing the money he is supposed to pay them, and along with him Sir Knight. When a misfortune happens, like today, he will not spend a coin even on medicine, let alone on a doctor. He begged to be punished as he deserved." All this puzzled the Duchess from another country, who had only returned to work today. Sylvia approached her ladyship and reported that the worker had been shown to the doctor. The princess asked how he was, and she was told that thanks to her help, he remained alive. The Duchess remained silent, and something still bothered the head maid. She asked if her Grace was planning to punish Paul. "Yes," Tuka answered and asked, "It is so important." Sylvia said he was one of Sir Knight's men. The name kept coming up, and the Duchess asked who he was. Sir Knight was the uncle of His Grace the Duke, and since the Duke's parents died in a carriage accident, Sir Knight had become the head of the family. And although Paul deserves punishment, Sir Knight may perceive this as an attack on himself. This means that her decisions may be taken as political, and in this family, everything is not so simple. The head groom, Paul, entered the office and, apologizing, asked her ladyship whether she had called him. And then he was surprised, noticing the appearance of the new Duchess. Tuka greeted him and asked if he was Paul. "She's pretty for a barbarian, I suppose. Not all of them have ugly faces, but anyway, she's just a woman, of no use even to the Duke." The man confirmed that it was Paul who had called him and asked why the Duchess wanted to see such a commoner. She said she wanted to discuss this year's budget, which he had written. He is too tall for the stables. He asks 20 gold pieces for repairing old tools. But the workers say that their salaries were cut because there wasn't enough money for repairs. Please explain this misunderstanding. He asked, smiling, if she didn't think he had pocketed the money, and asked the Duchess to listen. Things actually cost money, and even the average worker doesn't even realize the costs. In her homeland, they don't really like counting, so it's understandable why she also gets confused in calculations. Layla shouted at him not to dare speak to the Duchess like that. Paul shrugged and said that he didn't mean to be rude. After all, in Bashar they only know how to shoot with a bow. She might not even know numbers. The princess grinned and repeated his words. She doesn't know the numbers. Yes, she admitted she was wrong. Taking a step forward, she said that it was necessary to better understand the situation. Satisfied with his victory in the argument, he laughed and said he was glad she understood. But the next moment, the princess's true and correct answer did not take long to arrive. He doubled over in pain, sparks flashed in his eyes, and Sylvia looked at her in amazement. The groom was humiliated and groaned in pain. And Tuka mockingly asked the flat-minded simpleton, "Well, now she looks like a barbarian." She ordered Sylvia to compare the stable budget for the previous year with the actual costs and calculate the difference. If they don't find even a single coin, he will be dismissed from his position and driven out of the estate in disgrace. "You can't do that," exclaimed Paul, always covered by the Duke's uncle in horror. "Do you even understand who appointed him head groom? Sir Knight won't let this go." And she had no power at all. He imagined how angry the Duke would be when he found out that she had fired his uncle's subordinate. But then the Duchess explained that he had given her these powers. "What did he ask? What did he hear?" she quipped. "The Duke of Esbaden personally gave her the right to manage this estate. He probably thought that he was just a puppet who didn't know his place. Although he is an incompetent and lazy fool who has gone too far, does not admit his mistakes and becomes more impudent day by day." He gritted his teeth, and the Duchess ordered him to please, asking Sylvia to begin the calculations. But as soon as she took a step back, she heard, "The arrogant wild bitch." "What did he say?" she asked the completely insolent groom irritably. "You are nothing special," he said with particular anger. "She is an outsider here, a barbarian." Paul shouted that the Duke had married her only because higher-ranking officials had refused, and now she is pretending to be a real duchess. "What is it?" the man asked. Seeing the confusion on the Duchess's face, "I didn't know." "Have you completely lost your mind?" Layla exclaimed, going to help, but the princess asked her not to come closer. He thought he hadn't had the courage to tell his fiancée to her face that she had been rejected even before she arrived, and offered to tell him why. So much anger poured out of his dirty mouth, but when everything reached its peak, a cold voice asked if he was finished. Everyone was stunned, and Paul looked around in fear when he heard his lordship's voice. And Duke Esbaden, repeating his threat, asked if he had finished chatting. Then he carefully released the Duchess's collar and timidly told his lordship that this was not what he thought. Leonard came in armor, probably just back from a monster-clearing mission. She wondered why he was here. The Duke and Duchess looked at each other with an assessment. "Your Grace," Paul exclaimed, lowering his head, "he deserves death for his actions." But I must admit he had no choice, you see. Her ladyship hit him without reason. He begged him for leniency, but he himself thought that to get involved with him would mean to get involved with Sir Knight. "He won't do this for this bitch," Paul thought mockingly. But contrary to his expectations, the Duke asked him if he deserved death. Then why was he begging for forgiveness? He should have thought about the consequences before touching a married woman. "Your Grace," clearly stunned by this turn of events and not believing his eyes, asked Paul. But the Duke was not joking, he was serious. And then the groom cried out, he himself knows that if he punishes him, Sir Knight will become furious. Judging by the Duke's reaction, it worked, and he continued, "Believe me, he didn't need it at all. If he went too far, he would regret it," but then a wild, sharp pain pierced his body. The maids froze in horror at what they saw. The Duke mercilessly cut the man's hand, and he screamed in pain, wailing over his hand. Annoyed by Paul, Leonard said he was rude and organic. Besides, he had harmed the Esbaden family, and as its head, he should not remain on the sidelines. The Duke ordered him to be taken out, and all this time he was complaining of pain in his arm, and the Duke approached the Duchess. Then he asked his wife if she let all her subordinates grab her by the collar. Chuka said she could have easily handled it herself. There was no point in shedding blood. The Duke noticed her cleavage and how the man had ruined the look of her dress. He didn't want rumors to spread that she was eating breakfast in her nightgown and fighting with her subordinates. He deftly adjusted the collar of her dress, and finally, he said that he hoped that in the future she would behave as befits a duchess. Watching Leonard go and looking at where the blood was spilled, she wondered why he did this. The Duke has intervened in the matter, so now this Sir Knight will definitely not remain on the sidelines. But since it is true that he did all this for the honor of the family, then why did he look at Paul as if he had touched someone close to him? As night approached, Sylvia reported to his lordship how it all happened. It was the first time the Duke had heard of a noble lady going to the stables and saving the life of a servant. Sylvia said that her ladyship was trying very hard to fulfill her duties, so she asked her to understand. If she had been so determined, she would not have interfered with Nate's faithful dog, the Duke said. However, as his lordship's servant said, not many are capable of such a thing. She also grew up in a noble family, and she understands that she does not always behave appropriately, and yet, her actions may be contrary to decency, but not morality. She acts wisely, showing compassion. Her title aside, Sylvia admired her as a commoner. Leonard paused and said that he saw that she really did like her, and he ordered her not to allow rumors to spread about what had happened. She would be held personally responsible for any leaks about today's incident. She obeyed. And when the woman left his office, the Duke went to the window and looked at the moon. And he said what a difficult woman he got as a wife. When morning came, the Duchess said she was surprised he was late for breakfast and asked if everything was all right. The vassals interrogated the Duke all night because of Tiuka, but he only replied that the meeting had lasted longer than planned, that's all. Was it really all because of her, asked Tiuka. She had very diligently carried out all the duties of the Duchess, but it seemed she had only brought more trouble. It would be better if she managed to do everything with dignity. Although not without problems, the job is done. What? The Duchess thought in surprise. She expected the Duke to grumble at least a little, but he didn't. Suddenly their breakfast was interrupted by a knight who ran in and shouted to his lordship about urgent news from the capital. What is it? Asked the Duke, and the knight took a moment to find his words. And so he simply announced outright that His Highness the Fourth Prince would soon arrive in their duchy. Duke Esbaden was clearly alarmed by this news, and the servants whispered behind his back. And the princess wondered what the matter was, and what kind of prince this was. Anticipating the risks, he said to the Duchess, "When the prince arrives, please go to your room and do not come out until he leaves." What Tiuka asked indignantly, not understanding why she would suddenly hide. "What wonderful weather," sighed the fourth prince, heading towards the ducal domain. But the day will get even better when he meets the Duchess. In the Duchy of Esbaden, Tika asked her husband why such precautions were being taken, but without explaining the reason, Leonard said he would report that she was unwell. The many things she had to do today must have tired her out, so he asked her to go and rest. The lack of explanation of the reason was more tormenting than anything else. Everyone felt this tension. Naturally, having drawn her conclusions, the girl asked him if he was ashamed that she was from Bashar. The Duke asked where such a conclusion came from, and she asked pointedly, then why send her away? And she said with resentment that if he wanted her to be understanding, he should tell her the truth. After a pause, he answered, as if mocking the girl's feelings. He didn't need it at all. Already in the room, she broke the pen out of anger, causing Layla to worry. It was completely unnecessary. Tuka was furious, and how could she allow the thought that he had changed? She asked when the prince would arrive, and Layla was told that by tomorrow morning. "He is a member of the imperial family. How can he barge in without an invitation?" asked Tuka, and the servant heard that she and the Duke were close. "This prince is likely to inherit the throne. The 3 elder princes have already died, so it is likely, they say, that he is not on the best terms with his sister. His sister is the current heir, and thus the second heir to the throne, who so desperately needs the support of the Esbadens." The princess asked Layla what else she knew about this prince. She thought. He was also spoken of as an unfortunate prince. He was handsome and led a dissolute life. But, frankly speaking, it is the result of shock. His first and second wives died in an accident. Layla said outright that her princess was lucky she didn't marry him. A prince betrothed by fate to the life of a widower. A grim story, isn't it? Madame Sylvia checked that dinner was ready, that there was enough food, and ordered the best wines to be brought out. Arriving early was no excuse for them. When His Imperial Highness arrives, he will meet him personally, and servants who are not familiar with his providence will not take part. And just in time, it was announced that His Imperial Highness, the fourth prince, had arrived. The accompanying knights entered first, and then a voice was heard that did not warrant pompous greetings. "How many years, how many winters, how are you, Duke?" the prince asked him. He had felt refreshed since their last meeting, said the second heir to the throne, Justin von Vantrum. The Duke and his servants greeted His Imperial Highness. "Well," said the prince, "these formalities again." Dinner was ready. The Duke asked to be taken to the dining room. "Excellent," the prince agreed. He was just getting hungry. But before that, he made the Duke nervous. He asked his friend where the Duchess was. He would like to meet the one who could be his wife. The Duke apologized, but she was not feeling well today and would not be able to attend the dinner, which was a pity, Justine said. She fell ill right before his visit. He would have liked to see her face, and yet hunger overcame the desire to meet. He said that his sister was an intelligent woman, but she was not at all suitable for the role of Empress. Her skills were not sufficient for governance. As far as Leonard knew, Her Highness had good health and was also strong in magic. "With healing magic, one could rule the entire world," Justin answered, "and live almost forever." He asked if he agreed with him, and suddenly noticing that his glass was empty, he called out to the servant about it. The girl was taken aback by fear, and Madame Sylvia moved away. Not seeing the girl's reaction, the fourth prince asked if she hadn't heard. Realizing that there was nowhere left to retreat, the girl exclaimed, "Yes, Your Highness," and ran towards him. But here's the problem: before she could reach it, she tripped, her leg buckled, and there was a crash. The maid fell near the prince, broke a jug of wine, and spilled some on him. The fear of the prince's wrath frightened her more than the possibility of being hurt by the shards of glass. The girl apologized to His Highness, timidly justifying herself by saying that she had slipped. She asked for forgiveness, but only an unhealthy grin appeared on the psychopath's face. In a false, soothing voice, he ordered her to look at her, promising not to harm her. The girl thanked His Highness, but did not dare look him in the eyes. However, cruelly grabbing her by the hair, he asked what kind of servant this was, who was unable to even pour wine. He pulled harder, deliberately causing pain, and he asked his victim if he could teach her a good lesson. But then the Duke intervened in this chaos and asked His Highness to stop. "Enough," Justin asked, surprised. He told the Duke she had shown him disrespect. "It was just a misunderstanding," Leonard replied. He reminded the prince that they had gathered here for his wedding and promised to speak with the head maid about the mistake. "So please have mercy," he said laconically, but his whole appearance showed his anger. Only this could rein in the tower dog. And only because his friend asked him to, he let the girl go. Justin von Vantrum, the fourth prince, nicknamed the Unfortunate, lost his head from shock. Shocked by the loss of his wives, he was in fact a cruel man who beat them to death. He's obsessed with women, so he won't let that bastard see her. But by that time, the Duchess was already about to act and leave the room to spite Leonard. When dinner was over, Justin asked the Duke if they should talk elsewhere. "As you wish," Leonard replied, without contradicting the man, but then he called out to the Duke. "I asked him to tell me what the Duchess looked like, because they said she was ugly." He asked if these rumors were true, and Leonard was already thinking about the image of his wife. Everything came into his head. Remembering how he had pushed her onto the bed, his face turned red, but the fact that he had not responded made the prince think that he was offended. "Not at all," replied the Duke, and yet the prince felt sorry for him. He too would like to take a quick look at her, be horrified, and verify the rumors personally. On the other hand, it would be embarrassing if a princess from an allied state died in an accident. That's why Justin was glad that he ended up marrying her. The Duke made no reply to the prince's words of sympathy or joy as he went out onto the terrace. But because he froze in the passage, the prince asked the Duke what was there. "Nothing, sir," Leonard replied, watching the silver strands. Entering the room, she slammed the door, and Layla, worried, called Her Highness and asked why she had returned so early. She asked because she was planning to meet the prince in person. Tuka recalled the conversation she overheard, and what bothered her most was the moment when the prince spoke about her death being an accident. Everything needed to be sorted out, so she asked Layla to ask Sylvia to come see her when she finished work. At the end of the reception, the exhausted maid came and asked her ladyship if she had called her. She apologized for the delay, but Tuka asked the madam not to worry. She thought the reception had gone quite well. She asked if he irritated her constantly. Sylvia answered tiredly and honestly. But then the princess got to the point of the conversation. She had several questions for her. First, did they want to marry her off to the fourth prince? Right, she asked. Sylvia was about to lie, but Tuka said there was no point in denying it. It seemed everyone knew it except her. At first, she thought that he didn't want an arrogant girl as a wife, but now she thought that the reason was different. And so she asked Madame Sylvia to tell her everything she knew. Thus, Tiuke learned the terrible truth that the fourth prince had beaten his wives to death. How could it be possible to hide something like this twice? She asked, and Sylvia explained that only the prince's closest subjects knew about it. She found out by chance his lordship somehow let it slip, and if Tiuka had married him, she would have become the third victim. But she had already become the Duke's wife. Why was he so persistent in hiding her from the prince? The Duchess asked. However, it was difficult for the head maid to answer this question. You see, she began, perhaps this is new to her, but the fourth prince loves women very much. Particularly beautiful ones, Sylvia clarified. And what? Asked the princess. And the fact that both of the deceased wives were outstanding beauties from noble, ruined families, and the prince was persistent in his courtship. She might have decided that he would not desire a married woman, but she was afraid to imagine what he would be capable of if he saw her. Everything will be fine, answered Tiuka. She is of no interest to him, because she is ordinary. So why doesn't the Duke let her see the prince? She asked, unaware of her beauty. And when the dumbfounded looks of such stupidity caught up with her, the princess asked in fear why they were looking like that. Towards evening, the prince went out onto the terrace and sighed because it was so boring. No pretty girls, no beautiful view, the castle is too dull to match its owner. Suddenly, Sir Justin was called by his knight and asked when he planned to return to the palace. Whenever he wants, he replied. The knight said that, as he probably knows, preparations are underway in the imperial palace for the succession ceremony. And Her Highness the First Princess is choosing allies. The fourth prince ordered not to panic. His sister cannot get around him. She was born a simple concubine, and sickly at that. What kind of empress would she be? She is considered the first only by birthright, that's all. In fact, the first and only heir is he, the prince confidently declared, Justin von Vantrum. And when he becomes emperor, this insolent brat Leonard, dancing to his father's tune, will be forced to bow his head before him. The prince found out what the Duke was doing, that he was preparing a detachment for departure, and said that they had constant turmoil in Esbaden. But then, looking at the maids passing by, I noticed one among them that was different from the locals. The girl, unprecedented to the prince, was beautiful, not at all like ordinary girls. Catching her gaze, the prince paused and said with interest, "Wow." Her Highness is too hard on herself, Layla complained. She constantly tells her that she is beyond all praise, but she doesn't even want to listen. Sylvia, stunned by Tiuka, already thought that Bashar had a different ideal of beauty, where sharp and strong features were valued. And then I learned that Layla's father was from the Empire, and she lived here as a child before moving to Bashar. But before she could finish speaking, one of the knights who had arrived with the prince grabbed her by the hand. Behind his back, Sylvia saw His Highness, and it immediately became clear what turn of events awaited them next. She worriedly asked Sir Justin what he was doing there, trying to steer the conversation away, but he didn't listen. Having found the object of interest, he and the prince said that he had never seen her here and asked to tell him her name. At this time, the Duke was busy giving guidance to the knight going on a mission. Suddenly, another knight called out to his lordship with concern. Leonard said he would report later if it was not urgent, but it was urgent, the knight exclaimed. And he explained to His Highness in a frightened tone that His Highness the Fourth Prince was going to punish Sylvia. Tiuka obediently remained in her chambers and thought, never thinking that she would hear such conversations again. No one except Layla had ever called her beautiful before, so does she really fit the imperial standards of beauty? If everyone is of the same opinion, then why keep it a secret? Perhaps he meant something else. Something like, she's so beautiful that he can't let her catch the eye of this monster. Well, that's just fantasy, of course. It was a pity, of course, that she was locked in the room during the prince's arrival, but hearing the noise coming from the corridor, she looked out. Behind the wall they were discussing whether the Duke had been informed of anything, and the knight volunteered to urgently inform him of what was happening. Indeed, the servants in this estate are as impudent as their master. Say it again, he ordered the beaten Sylvia, and she repeated, His lordship ordered them to receive him as an honored guest. However, the man who attacked the girl in the owner's estate is no longer considered their guest. She confidently stated that they would not sacrifice their people for the sake of His Highness's entertainment. This confident and impudent behavior only provoked anger and impudence, he said. Well, the sword is great at settling such disputes, and since she is so ready to die, it will gladly help. No, Layla screamed in fright. Duke Esbaden, she screamed, and the fourth prince's blade trembled. Leonard arrived in time. What does all this mean? His lordship asked His Highness sternly. You, Duke, have completely let your servants go, the monster answered confidently. They dared to insult him. So he took on the task of re-educating them. Everything was clear, the Duke thought. Lust had taken hold of him again, but this time he was not allowed to carry out his plan. Esbaden is a duchy, Leonard explained, so he must punish for his actions personally. Well, fine, the prince interrupted him. But you see, Duke, he did not kill her only out of respect for him, and it would not be too fair to leave the guilty only to his judgment. And then the prince came up with an idea he would forgive his manager's rudeness if he gave him this maid. It would be a piece of cake for him. No, wait, don't! Layla screamed with anxiety and fear. Duke Esbaden thought it was that woman's maid they had arrived here from Bashar together. And if he simply gives her away and turns a blind eye to everything, the conflict will be resolved. But suddenly he remembered how Tuka had screamed. If he wanted her to be understanding, he had to tell the truth. I didn't want to go against the people of the Princess of the Allied Empire. It was a dilemma. Apparently, the Duke had already decided to stand up for the maid, but then Tuka asked him to forgive her. Stepping forward, she introduced herself as the Duchess of Esbaden and greeted His Highness. She heard a noise here and decided to find out what was going on. It seemed that her favorite maid had somehow displeased him. She asked to accept her apology. The servants' actions reveal their master's ignorance, so allow me to apologize for my charge. Princess, Layla exclaimed in amazement. The Duke remained silent, and the knight and prince froze, seeing her beauty. So she is a duchess? Asked His Highness the Prince. He grinned. Just wonderful. He would prefer to offer her a cup of tea instead of these empty squabbles. And as expected, he asked the Duke if he didn't mind. She asked him to forgive her for meeting him so late, but he said that he understood that the road had been long. This was the Duke's territory, but even here the prince could have killed Layla without blinking an eye. The Duke would not have stood up for a simple servant. She did not want to catch the prince's eye until the very end, but Layla's Raleigh had to do it. But what was he doing here, especially with that expression on his face? The Duke seemed to be very busy. The prince told him the same thing, but he remained silent. Tuka believed he had a lot to do and said he could leave His Highness to her. But instead of answering even one, Leonard chose a quiet silence, ruining the whole atmosphere. Then the Duke was disturbed by a knight who whispered something to him, and only then did his lordship announce that he would be leaving for a short while. Okay, the princess replied. So, left alone, after waiting a couple of seconds, Justin asked how she liked the Empire. The Duchess replied that she was quite happy with her life on this estate. The prince was surprised, based on the rumors about Bashar. He was worried about her. It's not worth it, she replied. What are you saying? He's a real wolf in sheep's clothing, but now he's quite calm. If he plays along, she'll be able to smooth things over. We must continue in the same spirit, but the prince said that if he had known that she was so beautiful, he would not have rejected the proposal of marriage with her. What, excuse me? Asked the princess, and he asked if she didn't know that she was originally supposed to marry him. Standing on the sofa, he came closer and asked the Duchess how she felt about his proposal. And hovering over her, he confidently asked if she wanted to become his wife. What nonsense is this? Don't forget that he is a member of the imperial family. You have to choose your words more carefully. No matter how unpredictable his words were, there was no point in getting into a conflict. She replied that she didn't think it was a good joke. Justin explained that he always gets what he wants, and this applies not only to things, but also to people. So wouldn't it be better for her to become an empress, and not a simple duchess? Tuka answered. I'm afraid she doesn't understand him. And she answered with confidence that her name was Tuka Yeli Bashar, and she was not going to live as someone's wife. This answer, however, struck the prince. The beautiful shell stupefied him, and he forgot that he was dealing with a barbarian. It's funny, he replied. You know, it's best to tame such obstinate people in bed. But such ignorance infuriated Princess Bashar, who had been restraining herself until then. However, here the prince's hand was intercepted from the Duchess's face by the returning Duke. The Duke, irritated at being interrupted in this way, asked the prince. He asked if he had completely lost his fear, holding it back. Leonard glared at the man. The fourth prince was almost hysterical about the fact that he dared to touch the monarch's person. Oh, what are you saying? Duke Esbaden responded with passive aggression. Those who forget themselves and do not know their place are worse than animals to him. The prince, on alert, continued to ask about one thing: whether the Duke had completely lost his fear. He became wary and in a commanding tone told him not to anger him anymore, ordering him to let go of his hand right now. But instead, Leonard squeezed the prince's hand only tighter. He continued to squeeze harder and harder, and Justin screamed in pain and fear. The prince's faithful knight came running to the cry, and it was he who discovered the bruise on the sir's arm. Justin asked how he dared to treat a member of the royal family like that, shouting that he would not forgive it and would immediately inform his father. "And what will you tell your father?" the princess asked casually. The prince, who beat his wives to death, decided to attack the wife of his own ally, and that's what he'll say, Tuka sarcastically said. The knight on the prince's side was taken aback when he first learned of this, and Justin was filled with a wide range of emotions. "Unlucky slaves," the prince muttered through his teeth, while the duke looked at his wife in amazement. "He is a prince!" Justin screamed hysterically. "In this empire, he is allowed to do absolutely everything. How dare they threaten him over a simple thing, especially to some savage? It seems that your position is the only thing he can refer to." The duke asked to be allowed to clarify something for him. He served only the crown prince and the emperor personally, and was not obliged to grovel before a simple prince. If he had decided to rely on his power, he must first defeat his sister, and ordered her to leave the estate immediately. Layla asked if Her Highness was okay. Tiuka asked not to worry, the conflict had already been resolved, but Layla blamed herself. Then the princess asked her not to say that, it was not her fault, and asked how Sylvia was doing. She was just at the doctor's. No great harm was done to her, and all this was because of this at the hands of the stray prince. The princess noticed how quiet and thoughtful her husband was now. She asked Layla to go and visit Sylvia, and she herself approached Leonard. She asked why he did this. She herself decided to stand up for Layla, but she didn't think that he would decide to interfere. "So?" asked the duke. He should have stood aside. The princess was waiting for an explanation. The first were those who behaved worse than animals, knowing no boundaries, and the second are those who dare to threaten his people. She was the Duchess of Esbaden, and there was no reason for her to let such behavior go unpunished, not even for the prince. She could have kicked him in the ass if she could have defended the dignity of her title. However, as soon as he said this, the princess either smiled or burst into tears, and the duke asked if he had said something wrong. "Not at all," Tuka answered happily. It seems he finally accepted her as part of his family. Leonard looked at her in shock and immediately turned his head away. She was a duchess. How could it be otherwise? "If there are no more topics for discussion, she can go to her room," she answered well. And finally, Tuke stopped the duke, thanking him for today. With these words, she left the room, and as I watched her go, I thought, this is truly an amazing woman. The prince cursed and shouted at the knight to pack his things. He did not want to stay in this backwater for another minute. But then a knight called out to his highness. "What else?" Justin asked him irritably. He said that he had an ambassador from the duchy, which the prince asked in astonishment. "But," the knight continued, "there is one nuance, you see. He is not a subject of the Duke of Esbaden." "What nonsense are you talking about?" asked the prince. But then a young man came out to them and addressed His Highness the Prince. He identified himself as a servant of Sir Nate, the Duke's uncle. And he informed the prince that Sir Nate was asking to meet him, and the prince tensed up. "You heard the maids gossiping, of course. 3 years have passed already, my God, already." Well, finally the castle will become lively. Otherwise it was mortally melancholy here. It was sad without Mr. Daniel. Layla asked the girls who it was, and they dreamily replied that they were sure that if she saw Mr. Daniel, she would fall madly in love. And thus, having kept up the conversation, she learned that he was the Duke's cousin, and so she was told. For his misconduct, he was sent abroad for training, and is now returning after 3 years of absence. Now it became clear why the castle was so lively. The maids simply adore him, but Tiuka did not know that the Duke had a cousin. "He is the only one," Layla answered. "He is the son of Sir Knight, who is not currently on the best terms with their Duke." The princess had a bad feeling about this, but then there was a knock at the door. With permission, Sylvia entered the office. The Duchess greeted her, and Layla really perked up. Ma'am looked better already. She asked her if she was in pain anywhere, how she was feeling, but Sylvia answered that he was fine. Tuka asked the maid why she was there, and she replied that she had brought an invitation. After all, the thing was that Sir Nate was inviting her to dinner this Friday. "But why?" Tuka asked, taken aback. It had been many years, Nate said, and it was time for him to meet his beloved nephew. Late Friday evening, before Sir Nate's dinner party, the Duke was thinking about Daniel being there too. The point was that Sir Nate wanted to use this opportunity to meet the Duchess, as his son would soon return to the country. Uncle was up to something, as always, so first he doesn't show up at the wedding. And now he suddenly decides to meet the Duchess if he could. He wouldn't go anywhere. Suddenly he was called by his wife's voice, addressing him as His Lordship. The beautiful Tuka was walking towards him from the estate. He looked at her with such shock that the girl stopped and asked if something was wrong. Leonard said he barely recognized her, but he's a real master at giving compliments, Tuka noted. But she also had something to say. His outfit emphasized his facial features, the Duke said. Her compliment was not very good either. It's more of a statement of fact, the princess explained. That's enough, the Duke replied. And he was about to tell her to give him her hand. He reached out to her, but stopped and did not finish. Tuka looked at him in surprise. Yes, it's time to go, Esbaden answered her look. Otherwise they will be late for dinner. There are 3 factions in the Duchy of Esbaden, the first being the Order of Esbaden, which is personally led by Leonard Esbaden. The second is the White Tower, a society of magicians led by Zerion, the head of the tower. And finally, the third Kreutz is a council headed by Nate von Esbaden, the Duke's uncle. Kreutz was initially created to help the duchy manage its properties, but soon turned into a group plotting against the head of the family. Having explained this to the princess, Leonard asked her not to be surprised if she did not receive a warm welcome from him. He didn't think that he would be kind to her, because she was not only his wife, but also Bashar's family. Apparently, thought Tiuka, their conflict was no weaker than hers with Nihir. Wait, is he worried about her? But now the realization of this has burned out into a blush, very unexpectedly. Soon they arrived and walked into the Duke's uncle's estate. Welcome, Leon, said the man greeting the Duke and his wife. And it seems they haven't met her yet. He introduced himself as Nate von Esbaden, Leon's uncle. Nice to meet you, sir, said the princess, and he thanked them for honoring him with their visit and invited them to the table. Daniel will come later. He is not feeling well, the man said, and asked to accept his apologies. Again he justifies himself with his health. Nothing new, the Duke sarcastically said. No need, Leon, the uncle asked. He knows about his condition. By the way, the new Duchess is much more beautiful than rumors say. Tuka thanked for the compliment. It is not surprising that Prince Justin became jealous of her. He inadvertently touched upon the conflict they had lived through. Leonard tensed and frowned as he wondered how he had learned about what had happened so quickly. He also heard that they and Bashar were endowed with special abilities. Tuka asked if he was talking about the power of nature. Indeed, a long time ago he visited a slave market. There was a slave who created fire from air, and soon he learned that it was a slave from Bashar. So, can she also show such tricks? Asked Knight. Yeah, thought Tuka, stunned. Not only does he demean the power sacred to Bashar by calling it a trick, but he also deliberately mentions a slave from Bashar before her, the princess. Naturally, the princess tensed up. She had to answer and try to save face. Seeing how difficult it was for the Duchess to answer, the Duke howled and interceded, but then his cousin interrupted him, saying, "Come on, father." If he wanted tricks so much, he could have asked him, and fiery butterflies scattered around the room. This is how spectacular the appearance of Sir Nate's son was. "So, do you like it?" Daniel asked his father and the new guest. "It's nice to meet her, madam," said the guy, and introduced himself as Daniel von Esbaden, and Tuka responded awkwardly. Sir Nate told his son to put away his butterflies and sit down, and he obeyed. So he is Sir Nate's son and the Duke's cousin. He is not what she imagined him to be. The princess thought he would be cold like the Duke or treacherous like Sir Nate, but he... Looking at the Duke and Duchess, Daniel said sweetly what a wonderful couple they were, as if spring had come to their castle with them. "Stop fooling around and get to eating," Leonard said rudely. Oh, his cousin asked if he was that unhappy to see him. But he was glad to have him, you see, he told Madame. He always turned his nose up at the very idea of marriage. But from what he had heard about the recent events at the estate, she was no ordinary lady either. What a relief, because she will need a strong character to survive here. The Duke could no longer contain his anger and abruptly stood up from the table, making a noise. He had never been to a dinner party where the host insulted the guest from the very beginning. "Are you upset, Leon?" Sir Knight asked him. He was apologizing for Daniel. But Leonid had already made up his mind and rudely interrupted, replying that his empty apologies were of no use to him. They were leaving. Well, he grinned. Because of the usual advice, the Duchess immediately lost her composure. He didn't expect anything less from a low-born boy. What? Tuka thought. Stunned. What was he talking about? Lowborn, the Duke was enraged by such a disrespectful remark, and he asked whether he did not think that those who, like animals, were ready to tear their relatives to pieces for the sake of power were worthy of such a title. Extending his hand to the girl, he said that he saw no point in staying here any longer. Apparently his uncle was a lousy host. "Come on, Duchess." The rapid development of events took Tuca by surprise, but she still extended her hand to Leonard. However, Sir Nate then told his nephew that he shouldn't behave like that. He understood, he was upset, but he shouldn't let his emotions control him. Hadn't his father taught him to be calm and collected in society? So be it, Leonardo replies, but thanks to you-know-who, he didn't have time to adopt this experience. He should also be more polite if he doesn't want his only son to lose everything. It was angering. This boy's behavior was very angering. He immediately began to contradict his own advice, losing his temper. But then Tiuca took Leonard's hand and, interrupting Sir Nate, thanked him for his hospitality. And she announced that it was time for them to go, and immediately after that the Duke and Duchess left. After watching the guests leave, Daniel grinned with interest. And already in the carriage, the princess asked the Duke why he left so suddenly. She had heard that Sir Nate was quite an influential figure, although he was a scoundrel. Leaving his dinner party would be disrespectful, but, Leonard replied, she was as calm as a rock. Of all the insults she had ever received, this was the most polite. Tuca shot her eyes. And the food looked delicious. He turned away offended. What about it, asked Tuca. She hadn't had lunch. Only now did Leonard think that he had left his wife hungry. He asked if she was hungry. It's all right, the princess replied. There's no need to worry. She'll have something to eat when they get back. After an awkward silence, she said, It's not her belly, he asked. Does he mean his? Maybe his too? She answered. I wanted to get out of it because of the awkwardness, but the Duke, understanding everything perfectly, ordered me to turn around and drive into the village. They arrived at a rather lively bar. Leonard was greeted and told that he hadn't been there for a long time, and asked what he would like. The Duke of Esbaden ordered 2 lunches and 1 drink. 2 drinks, please, she exclaimed. Okay, ma'am, the man replied. 2 meals and 2 drinks. He looked in surprise at the girl, glowing with happiness, and she asked if he often came to this tavern. Not often, but sometimes he drops by when he doesn't want unnecessary attention. She asked why he decided to come here now. It's simple. If they go to a restaurant right after a dinner party, rumors will spread. They married by order of the emperor, but many of the vassals are not happy with their marriage, and Sir Nate will also remain silent about today. He wanted to intimidate him, not cause a wave of rumors within the family. Their food was served. Looking at the portion, the princess noticed the bow-shaped pasta. For some reason, they reminded her of Daniel's butterflies, and she asked about the Duke's cousin. Is he always so unpredictable? Sometimes he is kind and friendly. Sometimes he becomes sarcastic. Don't get close to him, Leonardo advised. He can't be trusted. Isn't he? Tuca asked, part of his family. After hesitating over his answer, his lordship said that he did not consider them a family. And after what was said, he began to drink in large gulps. Tuca, stunned, advised him to slow down before he got drunk. I'm fine, Leonardo answered, but she needs to drink more slowly. Tiuca asked if he was worried about her, and she explained that she had never been drunk in her life, and if anyone decided to compete with her, he would quickly fall under the table. After finishing his drink, he abruptly put the beer mug down on the table and asked for 2 more. Anything else, they asked him. No, just a drink, and Tiuca was amused by the Duke's desire to outdrink her. The mugs piled up, the tavern emptied out after drinking, and it was time for heartfelt conversations. You know, the princess began, she too, one might say, is superfluous everywhere. Her elder brother, Nihir, was her enemy, and they were ready to kill each other. She was ready to do anything to defeat him. Then the father told Tuca that this battle for the throne was dragging on for too long. Maybe she would win this fight. But sometimes you had to take a step back, she said, and let the one you hated get what they wanted. Their clan wasn't strong enough to risk leaving the heir's throne empty, so if the fate of the clan was more important than victory, her father asked her to do this for the common good. She did not want to lecture her husband, but he would benefit from a good relationship with Sir Nate. No, Leonard objected. They were different. She said it wasn't so, but he stood his ground. The Duke wanted nothing more. He only wanted to stop what was rightfully his, and after what he had said, unable to control himself, he relaxed and fell asleep on the table. He could have at least warned her that he didn't know how to drink, Tuca thought with a sigh. He only drank a couple of glasses. Naturally, she had to drag the Duke out of the tavern herself. Looking at his face, Tuca thought, he is so defenseless when he sleeps, so he needs to pay. She asked the tavern owner for a minute, looking for money but could not find her wallet. It's him, she thought, reaching into the man's pocket. Is he carrying a bundle of money around with him? What a good-for-nothing. They shouldn't have shown off their wealth. How are they supposed to pay it off? Taking off her earrings, the princess apologized and asked to take this as payment. Looking at the valuable jewelry, the man shouted to the ma'am that it was too much, but she had already dragged the Duke away. Upon arrival at the estate, the Duke woke up and she pushed him towards the door of his room, telling him to come in and go to bed. She went to her room, wishing him good night. But even when she reached the room, she realized that the Duke continued to follow her. She nervously told his lordship that these were her chambers, and Leonard said he realized that it was unfair. "What exactly?" asked the Duchess. "This room, this bed," he answered. "Everything is his right here. So why should he go anywhere else?" And so he decided that from now on he would sleep here. "What?" Tuca exclaimed indignantly. But the Duke was no longer in a state to listen to anything. "Well, at least change your clothes since you decided to lie down." The Duchess said that she would call the maid now. Suddenly, Leonard asked if the Duchess could handle it herself. Tiuca was surprised. "What's wrong?" asked the Duke. "She doesn't want to." Well, it's hard with him, thought Tiuca. However, she didn't refuse the request. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she called Leonard to come closer. The girl began to help the Duke undress, starting with his shirt. It wasn't the first time she had seen a man's body, and she didn't understand why she was so embarrassed, or whether she was also drunk. While there was a pause, his lordship leaned on the princess's shoulder. "Your Grace," she exclaimed, embarrassed, and Leonard asked her to forgive him. The princess exclaimed, "If he wants to ask for forgiveness, then let him go first." He apologized. Because of him, she had to listen to these vile words. Tuca shuddered. Memories of tonight's dinner party flashed through his mind, wondering if he was worried about what Sir Nate had said. Come to think of it, he didn't just insult her, but what did Sir Nate mean then? She said she was fine. It was he who insulted her. It was not his fault, the girl reassured her husband. And therefore she asked, please, to let her go, but the Duke did not react in any way. He fell asleep, Tuca realized, and sighed with a smile. When morning came, Leonard got up and thought about why he was in this room. And how much he drank yesterday, he barely remembered what happened yesterday. "Good morning," the princess greeted him. She brought him some herbal tea with honey. It would help with a hangover. Frightened by her appearance, coupled with the lack of memory, the Duke ordered her to tell him what he was doing in her room. Sighing tiredly, Tuca asked if he completely didn't remember what he did last night. What did he do? Leonard asked anxiously. What was she talking about? He didn't understand. All night he did not let her sleep, although she really asked for it. Words cannot describe how hard it was. "It can't be," Leonard cried out in horror. "He would never." He grabbed her like a pillow and wouldn't let go. She continued and asked, Oh, was he thinking about something else? But it was time for her to go. The duties of a duchess do not wait. What kind of jokes are these? Leonard asked himself, blushing. The library she arrived at was empty, but it did indeed have an amazing collection of books. Sir Nate spoke of the Duke as a low-born boy, and the princess couldn't stop thinking about it, so she decided to look at the Esbaden family's family books. She went to look for the books, assuming they must be somewhere around here, when she suddenly heard a scream. The scream in the recently empty library was tense, and besides, who was this Sir even talking about? The princess looked out to see what was going on, and it couldn't be said that she was satisfied. Not only did she burn a man and a woman in solitude, and the man in this union was none other than Daniel, whom she had disliked. Embarrassed at being caught off guard, the girl screamed and ran away. God, Daniel said, not even trying to stop her. He said he was sorry that she saw him in that light and stroked her head. Even for someone like him, it's a pretty shameful occupation. Surprisingly, she said, What are you talking about? The guy asked. It is extremely unusual that a person in poor health, who is late even for dinner, can be such a nimble playboy. A rake, Sir Nate's son asked, laughing, his reaction puzzling the Duchess. And so she asked what was funny about it. A rake, Daniel explained, is a man who hangs around after every skirt. But he can hardly be called such because the ladies themselves run after him. But he's not offended by her, honestly. The Duchess didn't need his forgiveness for nothing. A stone fell from his soul, he exclaimed joyfully, and Tiuca thought that his words would not fool her. He asked her ladyship what she was looking for, and the girl replied that it was none of his business. They are in the library, the guy stated. Obviously she needs a certain book. He offered to help her find it, since he knew his way around here better than any librarian, but she refused, since she was capable of doing it herself. But still, Daniel wanted to help her, as an apology for the scene she witnessed. Well, in that case, Tuca said that she was looking for the Esbaden family book. The family book, he asked again and said, Okay, what is he talking about? The princess thought. But then a beautiful magic appeared before her eyes. You see? Daniel said. "It's one of a kind, so it's easy to find, so here it is." Grabbing the book that had flown to them through the air, he handed it to the Duchess, who thanked him. "By the way, for a foreigner from Bashar, she speaks their language perfectly. I thought it would have been difficult to learn, since the structures of their languages are very different." Tuka asked in surprise if he could speak Bashar, and the guy explained that foreign languages were his hobby. Then Princess Bashara decided to test him and asked him to say something in her own language. "I am glad to meet you," he answered in Bashar. "You are very beautiful. My name is Daniel." Well, now that I've heard the memorized phrases, everything falls into place. "Not bad," she said. "We only learned phrases for the ladies," he answered, laughing. "God, you got it wrong again." Then, before leaving the library, the princess asked if he wanted advice. "Of course," Daniel replied pleasantly. "Anything from her is fine." "There's no point in going out of your way to impress someone you don't like," the Duchess told him. "Excuse me," the guy asked, stunned by such an answer. The Duchess was an excellent reader, not only of books, but also of people and their emotions. That's why she knew he didn't like her, and that's why she told him he didn't have to put on the mask of friendliness. And finally, she thanked Daniel again for his help as she said goodbye. And so she left the library, leaving the man in complete shock and confusion. Daniel, her ladyship wondered what he was up to, but by and large she didn't care. So I began studying Tuke's book, and as expected, the book contained portraits of the Duke's entire family. However, opposite the stanza of the late Duke, the page with the portrait of his wife was blank. Eliza, an aristocrat, is not awarded a place in the family archives in only one case. If the rest of the family didn't acknowledge her because of her low birth, that's why Leonard spoke like that. Duke Leonard must have been very lonely. "Come on, stop frowning," she asked and asked, upset that she had run away then. But never mind, now she will please him. All these gatherings took place in the Duchy garden. When suddenly Daniel asked Amelia to stop. "What?" she exclaimed indignantly. "What other Amelia? Her name was Diana, a dog." So, having slapped yet another womanizer, she left in irritation, leaving him alone. Before his eyes, Tuka was still giving him some final advice, and he brushed the thoughts aside. But suddenly the Duchess appeared in front of him, and their eyes met again. He asked if she had gone for the books again. "No," her ladyship replied. "She simply wanted to return what she had taken." And she thought, was hurrying to the lady she had seen yesterday, to whom he was surprised but quickly remembered. He said that they stopped dating from that moment on. There was nothing serious there, so there was no need to worry. The Duchess understood him and asked why he was so interested in what she was going to do. "Because she's the only one," Danielle said. "The only one in what?" she asked. "The only one who understood what he was really thinking," he explained, coming closer. Chuka said that she would take it as a compliment, but also asked him to stop following her. She was no stranger to pursuit, but not as prey, so it turned out, he asked, that now she was chasing the Duke with all her might. "What?" the princess asked, stunned. He came closer to his cousin's wife, smiling slyly, and then he asked if she wanted to know what the Duke's real weakness was. The Duke's weakness, not believing what was said, she asked again if they were so close. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "they had once gotten along like brothers. There was only one thing he was sure of." Duke Leonard's mother was a charming and noble lady, although she came from humble backgrounds. His father disapproved of her, a dancer who made her way through the streets, complaining that she was an arrogant commoner who didn't know her place. Hearing this from the other person's lips made him feel sadder, and noticing this, Daniel paused and asked why the face was so sad. "It seems," Tuka admitted, "she accidentally found out about his weakness. He overcame everything to be where he is now," the guy said. For him, this would be more of a reward than a weakness. If she wants to know more about him, try to get into the back castle. There is hidden what the Duke values most, what he values, asked Tuka, what it is. "Well, if it's something so dear to the man that he hid it, what could it be?" he asked with a grin. The princess had no idea what this treasure was, which even Daniel knew about. Leafing through another book, the girl tried to find the answer. It's strange, in this book the budget for all other objects is laid out very carefully, but the budget for the rear castle remained unclear when suddenly her ladyship was called. Layla reported that she had gone around asking about the back lock, and the princess asked. "It's certainly suspicious," she began. "Firstly, they say no one lives there, but he is guarded by over 30 knights, and by knights we do not mean students, they are all ordinary knights. And secondly, she learned that all the maids serving in the back castle could not speak. She was sure that they had ways of communicating, they just couldn't speak, moreover." The Duke goes there at least once a week, brings accessories and dresses, and leaves empty-handed. So Layla thought that this place was a storage place for all valuable things. It's highly unlikely, Tuka said thoughtfully, but Layla still doubted that it was anything serious. And there was no way he could hide the woman, she said with confidence, but that confidence quickly wavered. Could this really be a woman? She exclaimed indignantly. Tiuka thought about Daniel's last words. He was right. She thought they were getting closer to each other, but maybe it was just her imagination. Layla continued awkwardly, telling her ladyship that if the Duke was hiding a lady there would be a lot to sort out with her. This would complicate things if she was carrying an heir, as the princess believed she would be, and she would have to figure it out herself. And then the next day the Duchess expressed to the Duke a desire to see the back castle. He asked her why, and the princess replied that she had already seen everything else except this place. After hesitating, the Duke said there was nothing to see there and she didn't need to worry about it. Why? She asked. Was there any reason why she should not do it, Duchess? He said. There is nothing there. She would only be wasting her time if she decided to explore this place. He had already said enough. Okay, her ladyship replied, turning around, if that's what he says, and left the office. And even so, she could figure out the answer herself. The rear castle was guarded by knights, the Duke's right-hand men, clearly tired from the monotonous work. God, Claude said, how he wanted to hunt some creatures. Standing here all day was quite annoying. Lord help me! Suddenly a sharp, loud cry was heard, causing the guy to jerk. What was that? He asked worriedly. It seemed to be from there. The scream rang out again. The comrade told Claude to be careful, and he stepped forward, pushing aside the branches of the bushes. Behind them he found a girl screaming in pain and asking for help. Her stomach hurt so much. What? Claude answered awkwardly. She can't come in here, but Layla only continued to writhe and scream. Baron asked Claude what was going on, and at that moment Layla grabbed the guy by the leg. Sobbing, she begged the knight to help her, saying that she was in too much pain. He couldn't leave the girl in trouble and told her to quickly climb onto his back. Claude shouted at Baron to guard the gate while he was gone, shouting over the girl, "Don't let anyone in." The door slammed shut, and thanks to Layla, the princess was able to enter the guarded doors. However, I immediately heard the sound of footsteps and almost kicked the bucket in fear someone was coming this way. But fortunately, they were maids who did not notice her, and she had to follow them. And so Her Grace made her way to the second floor, quietly following the servants. She thought there must be someone in the room they had just entered, and there were far fewer people here than she expected. The maids had disappeared into the room. Quietly following them, she reached the room and sighed, thinking, what if this really was a woman? Having opened the door, she was about to enter, when she suddenly heard a female voice asking Leon if it was him. Immediately, unceremoniously, she opened the door of the room, entering inside. However, what she saw shocked her even more than she could have imagined. Who? Asked the older woman, looking back at the girl in the doorway. Tuka was so shocked that she couldn't even put two words together, and the woman came closer. And then she enthusiastically asked the girl if she was Leon's wife. Yes, she answered. What? She immediately asked, trying to understand at least something, asked about her, and she only joyfully exclaimed that Leon told her. He has a wife whose hair sparkles like silver and whose eyes are like gold. While Tuka was fussing around, the woman exclaimed, "Nice to meet you." Her name was Margaret Schmitz. She asked to be known simply as Margaret. Margaret, Tuka suddenly thought, hearing the familiar name. She saw it in the family register. Margaret van Esbaden, Duchess before the late Duchess. So, she is the Duke's grandmother, Margaret asked ma'am impatiently. What is her name, ma'am? Tuka was surprised. Yes, replied the Duchess. She has just turned 12, as you see, but Leon always calls her grandmother. Strange, isn't it? The princess gasped, realizing what was happening here, and introduced herself as Tiuka. When suddenly the maid saw her, oh no, she thought worriedly. She was absent-minded. She forgot about caution. Who's here? They shouted from below. Hearing the rumble, the Duke's grandmother asked with a smile, Tiuka. Excellent, thought the Duchess, when behind her back they ordered her to catch the offender. Jumping from the second floor was too high, but she had no choice. Ah, he's a bit late, said the man, catching the Duchess in the air. Daniel, Princess Bashara exclaimed in amazement. The guy replied that he thought she might need him, so he came to pick her up. Sir? Claude exclaimed in amazement when he saw Daniel. What brought you here? The man laughed and replied, Go for a walk. The moon is beautiful today, then see you later. Claude reported that Daniel was in the back castle. He used magic to escape and they couldn't stop him. The Duke's right hand asked his lordship for forgiveness. He deeply regretted it. Leonard sighed heavily, then Claude suggested placing a magical barrier around the back castle. No, the barriers wouldn't stop him. He just hoped Daniel hadn't aroused her in some way. Baron responded about this. There was something he needed to say about it. The Duke expected an explanation. He burst into the Duchess's office with a bang and said coldly that he thought he had explained everything clearly. "Stay away from the back door," he said coldly, and asked if she even understood what she had done. "What does he mean?" the Duchess asked, slightly alarmed. "His only family is about to die," he explained. The doctor said she became overexcited after breathing in the cold night air and eventually lost consciousness. He asked me to let him repeat it again. "Don't interfere with anything that concerns the rear lock." His grandmother is sick because of her, Chuka thought anxiously. She pursed her lips in guilt, completely unprepared for how this whole visit would turn out. The fever didn't subside, the healing spell didn't work on her, so the only thing he could do was cool her down. That's all he could do now. He said she needed absolute bed rest. "So," Leonard asked. "She can't be cured, in fact, there is a way," the doctor answered. "An herb called Claudin could cure her illness, but it grows on the highest cliffs. Even an experienced herbalist could have died in such weather, but Leonard said he would go." "Sir," the knights threw themselves at the Duke's feet. "You cannot," they shouted to His Excellency. They said they would go in his place. "He is the head of the Esbaden house, please. He must think about the lives he must govern." The Duke looked at his close subordinates in bewilderment. And giving in, sighing, he said that he would wait until the rain stopped. Layla, soaked from the rain, ran crying to Sylvia, and Madame asked why she was outside at such a time. "Especially in this form, but it doesn't matter," Layla interrupted her. "They have an emergency." "Her Highness is outside now," she cried. "What?" Sylvia asked in surprise. What does she mean, look at the weather? But Layla was shouting that she meant that she just rode off on a horse. She went to get grass for His Excellency's grandmother. Sylvia trembled. She asked anxiously how she knew about it, but then the Duke asked Layla what she had just said. "Your Excellency!" Layla cried. The headmaid shuddered. And his lordship asked, in order to make sure that he had not misheard, who had gone and for what. Having heard the reason for the servant's tears, he could not remain on the sidelines. The knights shouted to him how dangerous it was to ride a horse in such weather, even for him. If he leaves while the late Duchess Margaret is ill, Sir Nate may wonder. As Leonard continued to jump, he wondered what she was thinking, going outside in such a downpour. He winced as he looked back. She always did what she wanted, but was considerate of others. Now he understood that such qualities were her charms, and the horses stopped when they met each other. The Duke looked up at the Duchess in amazement, and she said that she had the herb. "Claudin, this will cure his grandmother." But even after the princess said this, the man looked at her somehow distantly. Chuka did not understand what was going on. His lordship called out. Leonard dismounted from his horse. But then, after them, a worried Layla ran out of the estate, calling for Her Highness. She asked her to take it, worrying that she might catch a cold. The princess thanked her. "Oh my God!" the doctor exclaimed. "This is really Claudin," and asked where she found it in such weather. Chuka asked him to prepare the medicine for the patient immediately. "Yes, Your Highness," he replied. Looking at the princess, Leonard turned to the Duchess, who looked back. "If she doesn't mind," he said. Then he lifted the princess into his arms, and she shrank back in embarrassment. Seeing how the Duke showed previously unseen concern for the Duchess, the servants exchanged glances. And Tuka shyly asked Leonard to put her on the floor. She could walk on her own. But he hesitated and replied that he would prefer that her blood not remain on the carpets. The princess lost her shoe when she was going down the cliff. It was hard to get used to this care. Later, she asked his lordship if he should go and see his grandmother, Margaret. 3 doctors were caring for her. The Duke reported his presence would only hinder the healing. But he simply didn't understand. "Didn't understand what?" asked the Duchess. "Why did she sacrifice herself to get this medicine?" he answered. He simply couldn't think of a single reason. Tuka hesitated with her answer. But when she was little, her only sister died right in front of her. She was her only sister, but her other brothers ignored her because of her poor health. She always followed them, but they did not accept her. Only she played with her sometimes, letting her ride her horse. While she was away practicing archery, her sister approached the horse to try her hand at riding it. Then the horse kicked her and she died instantly. He asked her why she did it. So, she did it because she was capable of doing it, because she didn't want to lose someone she cared about again. He didn't want to scold her. How could he be angry when she got hurt getting this medicine? Leonard was grateful to her with all his heart. Chuka's heart gave a loud thump. When Leonard suddenly asked how she got into the back lock, the question really inspired her. "Daniel?" she said awkwardly. Daniel told her. Hearing this name, the Duke immediately turned cold. That is, Chuka tried to say it correctly. Daniel told her about the rear lock, but he sighed and asked her to forget about it. What he didn't understand was why she was so eager to see the back lock. "That's because," Chuka exclaimed, "he acted as if he was hiding his mistress." Hearing such a statement, the Duke froze, dumbfounded. He asked his mistress. And he gave his word that although their tank was created for the union between two nations, they are a married couple who have sworn to spend eternity together. She is his wife, and she will be the only woman in his life, so she shouldn't worry. As the doctor informed his lordship, the late Duchess had come to her senses and was asking about him. "Okay," Leonard answered. He'll go to her and invited Tiuka to go with him. She could go and agreed. Then Leonard said that he would like her to give him her word too. "What about?" the girl asked, and the guy answered that he would like her to not date Daniel anymore. But he is his cousin, and that is true. But does she think it is right for a married woman to date another man? After thinking, Tiuka said, "Okay, she will avoid meeting alone with Daniel." Leon thanked her. And smiling, he invited her to head to the back castle. Agreeing, she followed his lordship, while a turmoil of emotions was going on in her soul. Layla was indignant why she didn't use the healing spell. It could have healed her leg in the blink of an eye. But Tiuka read in a book that one can gain immunity to healing spells. So it's better to let the wound heal naturally, unless it's very serious. And still, the servant was indignant. Suddenly there was a knock. Layla asked what it was, and the princess opened the window. Daniel was waiting for her, but she had promised his lordship, so she asked Layla to go to the library. There was a shelf in the library dedicated to books about the Esbaden family. She asked her to give this letter to the one who was waiting for her there, and to tell him not to wait for her again. "Yes, Your Highness," the girl exclaimed enthusiastically, "heading there right now." Sylvia hoped that Madame had had a good rest. She brought letters addressed to her. The headmaid explained that it seemed that rumors about the incident in the back castle had spread. At 7 o'clock in Esbaden, there is a tradition for the Duchess to hold a meeting for noble ladies, and she believed these letters were about invitations. It had been quite a while since she had been here, and the ladies seemed to be waiting for invitations to this meeting. The letters did indeed refer to a meeting. Well, then it would live up to their expectations. The Duke heard that she was organizing a meeting and asked how the preparations were going. She would say that she was doing quite well, and ask if there was anyone she should be especially careful with. The Duke replied thoughtfully, it was better to be careful with each of them, but especially with Countess Jive if he had to choose one. "Countess Jive?" asked the princess. And the Duke, nodding, explained that this was Nate's right hand before her arrival. The task of leading the noble ladies fell on her. Tiuka wanted to expect at least a little hospitality from her, but she believed she would have to give up this hope. Leonard thought so. However, he also asked her to always remember that she was the mistress of this castle. Of course, the Duchess answered cheerfully, embarrassed. The day of the meeting arrived, and the princess greeted the invited ladies, introducing herself as Taisha van Esbaden. As everyone knows, she came from Bashar, and it took her some time to get acquainted with the customs of the empire, so that she could invite them, and therefore asked to forgive her. "Of course," Madame answered, laughing. "It was a great honor for them. They were grateful that she remembered to invite them." She introduced herself as Lyona Jive, Countess Jive. What an honor to finally meet her, Her Highness. They prepared a special gift for her and hoped that she would like it. "A gift?" the princess asked in surprise. "These are boats for riding," the Countess answered. And she asked if she wanted to try it with them, if it wouldn't cause her any inconvenience, of course. If they insisted, Tiuka answered. What a relief to see that she liked their gift. Jive suggested they come on board. The lady who remained aside looked at the Duchess with displeasure. It was an honor for her to meet her, Her Highness. The girl's name was Palin Blair. She was the first daughter of the Earl of Blair. "Nice to meet you, Palin," said the Duchess, but then the girl asked for forgiveness. And suddenly the Count's daughter deliberately poured pills into her hand in front of Tiuka's face. Having swallowed them, the girl exhaled. The Duchess became worried that Palin was not feeling well. "No," she answered pleasantly. "These are just tonics that she takes daily." The princess was glad to hear this. It's strange. Her old friend took his betrothed as his wife to spend the rest of his days with her, and she should be happy for him. But, frankly speaking, she was out of her element. Tiuka asked if by old friend she meant the Duke. Toga Palin said that she had been friends with his lordship for 15 years, and all her life she thought that she would marry someone like him. She envied Her Highness. She had him as a husband, despite the lack of effort. "Sorry, Palin," answered Tiuka. She asked if she thought she had become the Duchess of Esbaden without any effort. Then Palin asked her to tell how much she knew about him. "He has strange habits when he drinks. He doesn't like it when someone interferes with what belongs to him. He cares a lot about his people, excuse me," asked Palin. "It's surprising that she doesn't know this," quipped Tiuka. In response to this, the Duke's girlfriend grinned, and she asked his wife if she knew how his lordship lost his parents. Watching the Duchess's reaction, Palin realized that she didn't know this. But she knew, and she saw how deeply he suffered after such a tragedy. "Besides, I didn't want him to become even more unhappy because of the forced marriage." Suppressing the trembling of anger in her hands, Tiuka asked if she was hinting that she should break off this marriage. She heard that she was originally supposed to be married to the fourth prince. She has been a princess all her life. The title of princess suits her much better than duchess, doesn't it? As long as the union remains, no one will challenge her divorce. Tiuka grinned maliciously. She said she would prefer not to do this, and the Duchess's answer surprised Palin. "Of course, she will not break up her marriage because of her words," the princess explained. "Is this true?" asked Palin, and Tiuka confirmed it. Then the Count's daughter bent down to the floor of the boat and pulled the plug out of the bottom. "Then nothing can be done," said the girl. "Palin!" the princess cried out in horror. "Are you out of your mind? What are you doing?" With grief in her head, the girl said, "They can die here together, Palin," shouted Tiuka. "Lady Palin and the Duchess are probably having a pleasant conversation right now," the invited lady said. "Well," Jive answered dreamily, looking at the boat in the distance, "it looks like they've finished talking." Layla wondered if everything was all right with Her Highness. And looking out the window, she saw that very picture, and she immediately ran to Sylvia for help. She was very worried about Her Highness Layla. She asked if she was absolutely sure, and she screamed she saw her in the water. "God, how will they find her in such a huge space?" Layla drooped, sighing for Her Highness. But suddenly they saw the water oscillate, and the next moment Her Highness emerged from the water. Tiuka asked Layla to help Lady Palin. The maid was so glad to see that she was okay, and asked what happened. Sighing, the princess said that she would explain later, when suddenly something grabbed the girl by the leg. "The tree root grabbed her and lifted her up," she screamed. "Your Highness!" Layla exclaimed in fear. "What is this?" Tiuka asked timidly. The Duke was returning from another mission to the estate when he suddenly stopped his horse. He looked back at the flutter of wings of a flying flock of birds. Claude turned to his lordship and asked if something had happened. He looked at the sky and, after a pause, answered dryly, "Nothing." "Your Highness!" the maid cried as the tree carried the girl into the water with a crash. "No!" Layla screamed in horror, unable to do anything. "Princess Tiuka!" The tree was dragging Tiuka under the water. She couldn't breathe and couldn't get out. Is this really how she will die? An image of Leonard appeared in her head, the moment from which her heart began to beat faster. And the princess thought, why is she thinking about the Duke right now? All this was done for the sake of... Suddenly someone pulled her up. Oxygen entered her lungs, and opening her eyes she saw wheat-colored hair. Having cleared her throat, the princess asked, "Duke?" Daniel grinned and apologized for not being a duke. "Daniel," Tiuka exclaimed in shock, coming to her senses. "What is he doing here?" The guy explained that he was passing by and heard loud sounds, and it seemed to him that she was in danger. "Exactly," exclaimed the Duchess, looking around. "That thing that grabbed her, what is it?" "It is a demonic creature," Daniel replied. "This particular creature is of the plant type. Although weak, it is extremely fertile, so it can sometimes be found in places like this. Of course, he didn't expect it to appear here." "Then, was it he who killed him?" asked Tiuka. "Yes," he answered. "The princess thanked him for saving her." "No problem," Daniel replied. He was even pleased. Maybe she should take his jacket. "Your Highness," Sylvia and Layla ran up to her, but suddenly stopped in horror. "Your Highness," the servant cried out in embarrassment. How could she be so careless? "My God, Your Grace." She came running as fast as she could when she heard that she had had an accident. But she didn't know where to look because of her indecent appearance. It was quite awkward. The man only sighed. The Duchess looked angrily at the Countess and thanked Daniel. The question wasn't what she was wearing. The important thing was why this incident happened to her. She asked Palin if she agreed, and the girl shuddered fearfully. She, the girl began crying, was not sure what exactly Her Highness meant. "What did you say?" the princess asked in shock, losing her temper. She screamed that she had pulled the bolt to kill her, and was also going to kill herself to cover everything up. Does she have any evidence? Madame Jive asked, hiding her grin with her fan. Evidence? Asked Tuka, and the Countess meant whether she had any evidence that the lady had tried to harm her. She was nearby on a boat, but did not see Lady Palin doing anything that might harm her ladyship. She asked her acquaintances if any of them had seen Lady Palin plotting something against Her Highness. No, the ladies answered. They saw nothing, and the other one saw nothing either. How could she accuse an innocent lady without any evidence? Asked the madam. How could she blame someone who almost died? How cruel and merciless it was. The irritation grew stronger. If it wasn't too much trouble, they could always start looking for evidence. Right now he couldn't just stand by when it came to his sister. Daniel is the only son of Sir Nate who is supported by her husband. He is one of the key figures against the Duke, so why does he help her? He could find debris at the bottom of the lake. The skills he had acquired were quite useful. He asked the Countess if it would be a problem. No, Madame answered anxiously, not at all, and asked Daniel to continue. Then, asking for forgiveness, he took out the remains of the boards of the former boat from the bottom of the lake. He dumped them all on the shore, announcing that he had collected all the debris. To be fair, he would appreciate it if the headmaid looked at the subject of the clues to be objective. The woman agreed to help, but the madam who were plotting became even more tense. But unfortunately, Sylvia examined the debris carefully, but found nothing suspicious. The Duchess asked, stunned, if she was sure there were no traces. Yes, there were only traces of broken parts. She did not find the slightest hint that someone had made a hole on purpose. How this pleased Madame Countess. What a pity, Duchess, she thought. Even God was determined to prove Lady Palin's innocence. She was heading back, although you couldn't tell from her appearance she was an older woman, and the cold air could be harmful to her health. The other ladies also chose to leave. Tuka chuckled irritably. She saw what they were up to. Just wait and see. It's not over yet. It's all because of you, Palin screamed. And why did Jive ask? She said that the Duchess would disappear if she did this. And she did everything she told her, lured her to the lake, risking her own life, so why is she alive? It's really unfortunate, but her plan was flawless. She even placed the demonic creatures at the bottom of the lake. It's not her fault, but Daniel's, the man who saved the Duchess from the demonic creature. And what should she do now? Now the Duchess will tell the Duke everything. And then, Palin was worried. The Countess asked her to calm down. The Duchess needed evidence to accuse her. But as she sees they are gone, thanks to the demonic creatures, the evidence that they damaged the boat has been destroyed. So she can relax and not worry. Palin remembered something else, and then the Countess asked the lady something else. And the girl awkwardly asked when she could get some more devilish sleep. Oh, that remedy, answered Jive. You see, it is very rare. But the lady chattered. She couldn't rest without them. Good, good, the Countess answered with a grin. If the Emperor finds out about this, they could be executed. So she has to be very careful to get it. Tuka said that Lady Palin was taking some medications. She said that she takes them daily. And it was strange. She was absolutely healthy. As far as Sylvia knew, she even enjoyed horse riding. When Layla suddenly remembered, she smelled a spicy aroma from her. Then Sylvia asked if these were by any chance red pills. It was they. Sylvia knew only one remedy in the form of red tablets with a spicy smell. This is a strong sleeping pill. It is even used as an anesthetic because it is effective, but it is banned in the Empire because it is highly addictive. So she wondered why she took him with her. It was very strange, thought Tiuka. She really seemed dependent on these pills. Claude greeted her ladyship and inquired what brought her here, especially in such warm weather. She heard that he had missed lunch because of work, so she brought some bread and asked him to take it. Such care touched the knight very much, and he thanked her for her kindness. But where are the other knights? He asked. Claude replied that they were on a break now, so they were resting in the tent. What? Layla was indignant. Follow me this very second, she ordered. He must share. What? The knight was surprised and told her that someone had to look after, but Layla asked what could happen at all. Finally, no one was bothering the princess, maybe, she suggested to Sylvia. Now we'll look for those red pills. But your grace? Objected the maid. It is too big. Will they be able to find it? Chuka asked Sylvia not to worry. She had excellent eyesight. At this time, a high-ranking official, one of the vassals, came to see the Duke. He looked at him with displeasure, anticipating trouble. The man greeted his lordship, wishing him a good day. Leonard asked Count Blair why he should waste his time listening to him. But the Count was sure that the Duke knew about what had happened at the reception the Duchess had recently hosted. And what then? Leonard asked after a pause, as if provoking him to continue. Did the Count want her Grace to apologize to his daughter? Why then, he asked, had the Duchess that day accused his innocent daughter and scolded her sharply? And all this without any evidence. Duke Esbaden only sighed heavily. There is no evidence that she did it, but there is also no evidence that she did not do it, he explained. But this is nonsense, exclaimed the Count. And you don't understand, asked Leon. If his wife turns out to be innocent, he will be in a very dubious position. Therefore, when his lordship suggested that he stop this right now, the man was taken aback. If that's all, you can leave, the Duke said coldly. The Count smiled and said, okay, he will forget about this incident, but with all due respect, he thought, that the Duchess needs to watch her behavior? I wonder if he knows about it. He mockingly told how Sir Daniel had saved the Duchess when she fell into the lake, and the Duke was overcome with anger. The Count achieved exactly what he wanted, knowing full well about his relationship with his brother. He had to say that she was dressed in a most inappropriate outfit, and was not the least bit embarrassed to appear in such a state before Sir Daniel. He understood that she came from a freer country, but that didn't apply to him. Having said this, he hoped that her ladyship could become a woman worthy of bearing the name Esbaden. He uttered words that were degrading to the Duchess, striking the Duke both by this and by the story itself. After some time, the Duchess and the Duke gathered at the dinner table, each immersed in their own thoughts. The Duchess found a jar of the product in such a vast area in less than 10 minutes. Palin took these forbidden red pills. This could be the first evidence that will lead to the unleashing of powers. Forces seeking to undermine order in the duchy. She had to tell the Duke about everything now. He asked what she was thinking about. Oh, answered Tayuka. Actually, she wanted to show him something and asked if he wanted to look at it. In the Empire, this drug is called Devil's Sleep, she said as she handed over the jar. Palin received them at the reception. Right in front of her before the boat sank, she found this at the bottom of the lake. The Duke hesitated to answer and simply said that he would take it into account. The Duchess started and asked in surprise, and that was all, and Leonard asked what she wanted to hear. She was surprised by such indifferent coldness and sighed heavily, asking not to worry about it. She felt stupid. With a groan, the Duke admitted that he too had something he wanted to say. It seems she didn't listen to what he said last time, what he was talking about. Tayuka was indignant. Daniel, he explained coldly, he had told her not to be alone with him. When they got tired of becoming such close friends that she could appear before him in an inappropriate manner, the Duke asked, "It seems," the princess answered cautiously, "there was a misunderstanding. It happened by accident. He was passing by and saved her. And their conversation was just an exchange of pleasantries," she answered, and Leonard asked, "By chance, you say?" She might think so, but Daniel's intentions could be completely different. He repeated for the last time, "Make sure he doesn't hear again that she was in a compromising situation with another man." "This!" exclaimed the princess. But then the Duke had already left the table. Before leaving the room, he said one more thing, and from that moment on, she didn't have to worry about anything. He will take care of it himself. And I asked the princess, "Please do not forget about your position as a duchess." In the back castle, Grandma asked Tayuka if Muffin wasn't cute. Tayuka asked if Muffin was the name of a toy cat. "Muffin is not a toy," she replied. "He can talk. Thank you for curing the disease, Margaret," he says. Listening to this, the princess laughed, while she was overcome with mixed emotions. Seeing the state of Leon's wife, his grandmother asked Tayuka if something had happened. She looked sad. Well, actually," she wanted to answer, but the woman immediately realized that it was because of Leon and asked what that was about. Tayuka looked at her grandmother in amazement and asked how she found out. "Well," the old woman answered thoughtfully, "Margaret has good intuition." "So what happened?" she asked. "Well, and then Princess Bashara poured out her soul to her, and Margaret said, well, of course, the thing is that Leon loves Tayuka. You know, when Leon comes here, he always talks about her, what Tayuka said today, what expression she had on her face, what she did. And when he talks about Tayuka, he always looks happy. Yesterday, he said that he was glad that Tayuka wasn't seriously hurt. Doesn't this mean that she is dear to Leon, this man? He worries about her." Tayuka's heart beat faster. But Margaret liked Daniel too, so she hoped that the three of them could get along. "So," old lady Tayuka asked, "help them so that they both become like before again." Margaret said this from the bottom of her heart, and suddenly a clouding of consciousness occurred in her head again. She asked Tayuka what they had just talked about. "Margaret," Tayuka gasped, "about Leonard and Daniel." Suddenly, there was a crunch of branches outside the window. Not hearing it, Margaret asked Tyuka what had happened. "What is that sound?" the girl thought anxiously. "An intruder, but there are knights standing outside." The only one who could break through such dense security was Daniel. She noticed him downstairs and wondered why he was there. She had to go down and check. Realizing that he had fallen, the girl tried to wake him up and bring him back to consciousness. "My lady," he said to the Duchess, "how pleasant it is to meet her by chance in such a place." By chance, Tyuka thought, stunned. The guy was breathing heavily and didn't look very good. She asked if he was okay, saying he looked bad and she would call a doctor. She asked if he was listening to her, but then Daniel disconnected again, and the Duchess became alarmed. "I had to drag it inside and observe the condition." After some time, Daniel came to his senses and seeing Tyuka asked, "My lady." He wanted to ask something, but she answered without listening to the end, "They are inside the rear castle." As expected, the guy noticed, his lady was so kind. The doctor said that due to him overexerting himself during the recent monster suppression, fortunately the fever seemed to have subsided. "Well, come back when you feel better," advised the princess, and she went. It was time for her to go, but then Daniel took her hand, stopping her. The deliberate touch created an awkward and oppressive silence. He looked at her in his own way, and Tyuka looked back fearfully, calling him by name. Suddenly there was a bang at the door, and the Duke, angry at what he saw, asked what he was doing. He asked menacingly how he dared to touch the Duchess, and Tyuka became wary. "You've gone crazy," Leonard explained angrily and fiercely. He quickly came closer to them and forcibly tore Bart's hand away from his wife's hand, causing pain. "Wait!" the princess exclaimed to her husband. "What are you doing with the sick man?" The Duke stopped. "What is she doing?" he asked indignantly. "Does his wife really think that the maids in the Duke's house are just decorations?" There is no need to interfere in this matter. Tyuka was simply stunned. She wondered why the Duke, as before, was now too. Thoughts grew into bursting feelings. She did not finish speaking but screamed as a person can. "Indeed," she exclaimed, clenching her teeth in a depressed voice. And just as abruptly as she had snapped at the Duke, the princess walked around him and left the room. The door slammed behind her, leaving Leonard tense and Daniel exhaling heavily. "They say a man's jealousy is terrible, but to see it in person is an even more pitiful sight than ugliness," he laughed. "A man full of suspicion is hard to love," said his lordship's brother Daniel van Esbaden. Leonard became angry. "You always use the same excuse, saying it's always an accident, thinking he has no idea what he's up to." Leonard was not about to waste words, so he ordered him to stay away from the Duchess. "And if he refuses?" Daniel asked with a grin. What did the Duke ask, becoming wary and stepping back? For someone who had no interest in women, why was he so sensitive now, he asked. Wasn't his marriage simply a means of winning His Majesty's trust? Perhaps he fell in love with the Duchess. The Duke hesitated, thinking about his answer, and then hissed at him to stop talking nonsense and get out of here immediately. His wife is truly a wonderful person, Daniel told his lordship. So he advised him not to do anything that he would regret, though first he would try to take her away. The direct statement of rivalry from his brother was a bolt from the blue, causing Leonard to become wild with rage. The Duke was enraged by his brother's words, taking his anger out on the wall behind his head. Leonard frowned and said that he should be grateful for that. That he didn't even want to touch him with a finger. He was so disgusting to him. "Oh," Daniel answered. The Duke turned around to leave, and Daniel said that since he had fully recovered his strength, he would probably go. The Duke looked menacingly at the guy. But there was no one there anymore. He ran away like a coward. A few days later, a servant asked her if she thought the atmosphere in the estate had become tense lately. She agreed. The air became so heavy that it was difficult to breathe. Her friend had the same thing. Layla heard this conversation and became wary. "So," Tyuka asked after hearing the maid's report, "are the rumors true after all?" "Yes," Layla confirmed. Tyuka sighed, but thought that after that day it was not surprising. Then she snapped at him, and since they hadn't really gotten to know each other, such rumors were common. She also said that a herd of magical creatures attacked the territory. Even the knights sent from the estate were defeated. They said that this was the first time they had encountered such difficulties. Tyuka became tense. There was a knock at the door, and, with the mistress's permission, Sylvia entered and addressed the Duchess. She said that the Duke needed to leave because of an attack by magical creatures, so suddenly the princess was surprised. All the inhabitants of the territory were destroyed, and he was forced to take quick action. She asked the Duchess to be careful. But at that moment, Tiuka was already running to the Duke, anxiously thinking about how serious the situation was if he was leaving so urgently. But at the moment when the princess left the estate, the knights were already leaving it. "Leonard," she shouted after the delegation, and the Duke heard the Duchess calling him, and he slightly moved his ear in her direction. Tiuka looked after him with worry, expecting to at least meet his gaze. But Leonard, pursing his lips, turned away from her completely. The princess just wanted to tell him to be careful and come back safe and sound. Continuing on his way, Baron awkwardly asked my lord about what he had just heard. It seemed as if the Duchess was calling him, and he was anxiously asking if he was really going to leave like this. Leon closed his eyes. He knew exactly what expression she would have on her face. He wouldn't be able to leave if he saw her face. Claude informed the Duchess that while my lord was away, he had been appointed to guard the estate and accompany her. The Duke entrusted him with the protection of the estate and the escort of the Duchess. Claude promised to carry out his orders. So he doesn't want to communicate with her, but still cares for her as if she were a duchess, Tiuka thought sadly, sighing. She told Claude that she would go to the outbuilding to get some fresh air, asking him to leave her alone. In the back castle, Margaret asked Tiuka what had happened to her, seeing that she looked sad. To be honest, the princess admitted, she was worried about the Duke. About Leonard, the grandmother asked. The princess said that he had gone off to fight magical creatures and that the situation seemed very serious. Margaret understood. Oan asked why she didn't ask the muffin for help. The muffin could solve any problem. "This toy," thought the princess, Margaret said, "she can help." "What nonsense," the girl thought, but then a voice asked why she thought it was nonsense. The muffin spoke to her, and seeing that she flinched, he said that she was scared. "Who are you?" Tiuka asked, stunned, "and what's wrong with Margaret?" Smiling, Muffin asked her not to be surprised and informed her that he had simply stopped time for a moment. "But that's impossible!" cried Princess Bashara. Perhaps the toy chuckled. His name was Syrian, and he was the master of the magic tower. Taken aback by such a statement, the Duchess asked, "He is the Archmage Syrian, and what," he asked, "are there any problems?" To be honest, he didn't plan on revealing his identity and interfering more than once, but he decided to help because she saved Margaret. She asked how he was going to help, whether he could send mages from the White Tower as reinforcements. Unfortunately, the truth was that he was the only mage in the White Tower. "What?" asked the princess. "Was the White Tower created only to imprison him?" "The rest of the magicians in it are fakes created by him, but there is information that he could give." There was a man who knew that the Duke was leaving, and what that meant she cried, but Syrian thought he had said enough. Now she had to figure it out herself. The time-stopping magic was ending. Tiuka asked him to wait. But then Margaret turned to Tiuka. The woman excitedly asked the girl why she had such a face. "It's okay," answered Tiuka Margaret. "Everything's fine." Suddenly, Claude ran into the room, distracting the girls from their conversation. He exclaimed in alarm that troops from Kreutz had just been sent to help the Duke. "What did he say?" the princess exclaimed. "How could they send private soldiers without the permission of the person in charge?" They had just received a letter asking for support for the Duke, but how, she cried, had he been able to send reinforcements so quickly? But at that very moment, it dawned on the princess what Syrian had said, but she didn't think that was what he had meant. There is no chance that private soldiers could have been sent without the permission of the head of Kreutz. "It must be Mayor Nate's doing." Tiuka asked Lord Claude to calm down. He received orders from the Duke to guard this castle. But Lord Nate sent private soldiers to the Duke's location without saying a word. He could not do this without selfish motives, and the Duchess agreed with this. Claude was surprised that the Duchess knew and agreed with how dangerous this could be. "So," Princess Bashara said, "she will personally check it out." And then the princess came to meet the Lord, his dear daughter-in-law. "How much time has passed?" said Sir Nate. Tiuka said that she was glad to see him, Sir Nate, in good health. So, the man asked what he owed to her visit. He was surprised to hear that she had decided to visit him alone. She heard that Sir Nate had sent reinforcements to the Duke. He did not deny it when he answered. The situation seemed urgent, so he sent help. He couldn't sit idly by, because for Leonard he was the only uncle, but of course if the old man's decision bothered his daughter-in-law, then he will order them to return right now. The man was sure that they had not gone far. "Not at all," Princess Bashara answered her husband's uncle. She was amazed by his wise decision. She trusted Sir Nate. How could she not trust a man who would use his power for his nephew? But that doesn't mean she trusts the other nobles, so it would be quite reassuring for both of them. If someone trustworthy would take charge of the reinforcements, he asked if she had anyone in mind. The Duchess smiled pleasantly, and she said, Sir Daniel, Daniel, Claude exclaimed in horror, having learned the details of the meeting. Your Grace. He was sure she knew everything about their relationship with His Grace, didn't she? She understood, the Duchess answered Sir Claude, but she also believed. What is the difference between a bad relationship and not trusting each other? So she asked him not to worry, guaranteeing that Daniel would not do anything that would harm his lordship. According to Margaret, they were very close, so there was a high chance that Daniel would not harm the Duke. Your Grace, Claude tried to reason with her, but Tuca said therefore instead of worrying. She asked Sir Claude to please focus on strengthening the castle. The man nodded in agreement, obeying the Duchess's instructions. Thus, Daniel was appointed manager of the reinforcements sent to the Duke. The father asked Daniel to remember he didn't have to do anything while he was there. The father repeated the same words over and over again. The son replied, "Then he will proceed from the fact that he understands what he means. Stay there, don't do anything." He asked if he understood him, father. Daniel turned to him. Listening to him speak so categorically, even he began to doubt him and asked what he had planned this time. "What are you thinking about?" Nate shouted. "Kill your own brother and pass it off as an accident," his son reminded him. "What is that if not a plan?" "Okay, then he will go on his way. He must hurry if he wanted to catch up with the reinforcements that had already been sent." The door slammed behind the boy, leaving his father tense and confused. The Count told Lord Daniel that he did not expect to see him here, but the boy remained silent. But still, he politely replied to Count Blair that he also did not expect to see him here. They were glad to welcome him here. He was worried that there were not enough magicians for such a number of demonic creatures. But now they had nothing to fear. Daniel said he was flattered, and the Count asked if he could find out what these huge boxes were. "There is nothing particularly important, nothing worth worrying about." The Count laughed. He had never been able to contain his curiosity. And so, acting as the boss, he reached his hands towards the boxes behind the guy's back. However, this attempt was thwarted. There were some pretty dangerous magical instruments inside, so he couldn't show them. He also didn't like it when others touched his things, he explained threateningly. As politely as possible, but with fury, he asked Count Blair to remember this. The Count laughed in confusion. He said that he understood him and asked if they could send it. "Of course," the magician answered, smiling. Daniel laughed. The box clicked and the princess looked out. At the sight of the battle, the flames were blazing. "How noisy," said the Duke, watching the fire. He asked Baron how many knights they had. They had to get to work immediately. "Including the 2 of them and not counting the wounded," the knight answered. "There were about 4 of them. The situation is very grave." My lord asked if they had received an answer from Claude. Baron tried to find the words to answer, when suddenly his lordship and Sir Baron were called out to announce that reinforcements had arrived from the castle. The speed with which the reinforcements arrived amazed the Duke. The meeting in the tent made Leonard very happy, and he asked Daniel why he was there. Laughing nervously, he asked to believe that he was not here of his own free will, but it was painful for him to watch when his lordship frowned. "You see," Daniel explained, "he had no choice, as her ladyship had appointed him to lead the reinforcements. He would tell him this only to prevent any misunderstandings, but the Duchess did not ask him personally, because it was his father who made the decision to send reinforcements, and he was sent here only to make sure nothing happened." The Duke was somewhat perplexed by the current state of affairs. "But of course," Daniel exclaimed. Apart from that, he was glad that her ladyship had entrusted this role to him. "Ah, yes, sir," the magician continued. "He may have heard already, but Count Blair is here too." But this news made Leonard furious and extremely wary. Count Blair, alone of all the nobles, so Nate sent one of his men. But now was not the time to think about preferences. And, Daniel continued, her ladyship had sent everything necessary. He asked what he proposed he should do with it. "Everything necessary," Leonard asked him, if he meant those carts outside. "That's all right," the brother answered, and looking out of the tent, the Duke began to think. After examining the baggage that had arrived with the reinforcements, he said that he would leave it to his discretion. Suddenly, among all the things he had brought, he was caught by one box in which he recognized a familiar aroma. He walked purposefully towards the box. "Your Grace," Daniel exclaimed, afraid that they would be discovered. But when the box was opened, the cousin awkwardly said that it contained his personal equipment. Maybe he would be interested in the other boxes. What did he expect? Leonard thought. There was no way she could be here. He ordered the boy to move the boxes to a more suitable room in the castle. "Yes, sir," the magician replied, and he himself, amazed by what he saw, hesitated and said, "It's amazing." It was truly a difficult period in his life. There was still time to return, he told her grace. He asked why she had come all this way, whether she had considered him unworthy of her trust. She had trusted him. That's why I asked Sir Nate to hand over command of the reinforcements to him, but his father couldn't be trusted. She believed that Sir Nate was plotting something against them. Syrian had hinted to her about it. Syrian? Daniel asked in amazement. She was talking about the owner of the White Tower. My God, how did she manage to talk to such an elusive person? It doesn't matter now, the princess explained. Now they need to find evidence. Exactly, but, the guy asked, she certainly didn't go to the battlefield just because of a small guess, right? Yes, his father hates the Duke, but still holds the Esbaden house dear, but they don't know what he's really capable of. But why did she come here herself? She could have sent someone else. Tuka considered herself the most reliable option. She had to ask Daniel something, and asked if he could change her voice temporarily. He could have done it easily, but he thought she would have to keep her hood up all the time when she went outside. That's what she'll do, Tuka answered, suddenly hearing a voice that sounded unusual for her. He also asked to keep this with him at all times. It was a necklace made of a magic stone, filled with his energy. Thanks to him, he would be able to find her. Wherever she was, Tuka didn't think she needed him, but Daniel insisted that she take him. Then the princess thanked him for his concern, and Daniel thought that if something happened to her, he would not be able to forgive himself. By ringing the bell, the man at the front announced to the palace the announcement of the demons. The werewolves were in sight. The Duke stood ready. He ordered the Baron to take reinforcements and attack from the left. He himself was about to attack from the right. They watched. God, he said, these creatures are approaching without stopping. She had to help them now, the girl said, but suddenly the magician stopped her. The thing is, Count Blair was passing by. She asked why he was here. He should be fighting monsters. Daniel didn't like all this either. He offered to watch. The barrier creation was completed. The magician asked if they should activate it now. Activate it, the Count ordered. Oh, Sir Nate, his methods are sometimes difficult to understand. It's hard to imagine that he himself came up with the idea of getting rid of the Duke. After brainwashing the werewolves and making it look like an accident, an arrow flew at him a moment later. What? The man cried out in horror. Who fired that arrow, almost killing him? It must have been, the magician replied, that someone fired this stray arrow from the battlefield with the demons. Whatever it is, activate the barrier. A little later it will go to the Duke. Yes, my lord, the magician answered. When they disappeared, Tuka shouted at Daniel to let go. The guy shouted that her grace should calm down. Didn't he hear the Count's words? Asked Tuka. He plans to kill the Duke and make it look like an accident. But this does not give her the opportunity to shoot him in the head. She herself must not harm the Count. This would be tantamount to destroying evidence. Only now did Daniel's words bring Tuka to her senses, and she realized that she had almost done something stupid in the heat of the moment. Okay, she agreed. Then she should ask him for something. The guy listened. She told him to go and inform his lordship of Count Blair's plot, she asked. He, Daniel asked in amazement, and the princess answered confidently. At this time, there was real chaos on the battlefield. The werewolves attacked without stopping. The Duke ordered not to hold back. He shouted, "A wound on the battlefield is a medal. No matter how severe the pain, it leads to victory. Now fight." The knights agreed. It was hard to fight one beast. His lordship was truly magnificent. A magician came out onto the field and, asking for forgiveness, snapped his fingers. With one swing, he destroyed the 3 werewolves and announced that he would move on. But things were bad. Daniel spent more mana than usual. However, he was able to reach his lordship at the request of the Duchess. He informed the Duke that he had an urgent message for him from her grace. Leonard reminded her grimly that he had warned him to stay away from her. Without making any threats, Daniel asked if he wanted to hear the message or not. Relaxing just a little, Leonard said, "Very good, pass on the message." Well then, he asked the Duke to let him take them where they would not be heard. Having sent the magician to her husband, Tiuka continued to help fight the demons from the rear. The monsters received blow after blow, but there was no end to them, when suddenly his lordship called Daniel. Seeing her comrade in arms, she ran up to him and asked if he had told his lordship what he had answered. Well, Daniel answered her guiltily. He did so, but his lordship said, even if what he said about Count Blair was true, he would deal with it himself, so he had nothing to worry about. "That's all he said," Daniel reported, "which," Tuka exclaimed, "and that's it." Worried about her husband, she asked how he was going to resist the wizard.